Some campsites feel empty when you first arrive. No cars nearby, no voices through the trees. Just a tent, a road behind you, and the sound of the woods settling after dark. But sometimes the quiet does not mean you are alone. Tonight's stories are about remote campsites where something was close enough to hear, close enough to leave evidence, but never clear enough to explain. Before we begin, comment what time it is, where you're watching from. And if you ever see a campsite number that does not match the map, maybe don't stay long enough to find out why. I noticed the rain jacket first. That was the thing I remembered later. Not the sound in the trees. Not the way Mark stopped joking after midnight. Not even the mud on my sleeping bag. It was the yellow rain jacket hanging from the line between two pine trees, turned inside out, like someone had taken their time with it. We got to the campsite a little before sunset on a Friday in late September. It was one of those dispersed camping spots off a Forest Service road in Oregon. No numbered pads, no bathrooms, no other cars nearby. Just a flat patch of dirt, an old fire ring, and enough space between the trees to fit one tent. Mark had found the spot on a camping forum. He said it was quiet. That was the whole point. We had both been working too much, and he wanted a weekend with no cell service, no people, and no noise except rain and trees. I remember him saying that while we unloaded the car. No neighbors, no kids, no generators. Perfect. The road in had been worse than we expected. The last stretch was narrow and washed out, so we parked near a bend and carried everything in by hand. It was maybe 8 minutes from the car to the clearing. Not far enough to worry about during daylight, but far enough to matter later. We set up the tent before the light disappeared. Mark handled the poles while I tied a tarp between two pine trees. The forecast said rain after 10, and the sky already had that flat gray look that makes the woods feel lower than they are. There was a rusty bear box near the edge of the clearing. That made Mark happy. He was always careful about food. He locked our cooler inside it, then hung our wet outer layers on a cord he tied between the tarp tree and another pine. His yellow rain jacket, my dark green hoodie, a blue microfiber towel, 2 pairs of socks, a small nylon pouch with gloves in it. Nothing unusual. We made coffee on a little propane stove, ate chili straight from the can, sat by the fire until the rain started ticking softly on the tarp above us. By then it was fully dark. The forest beyond our clearing had disappeared into one flat wall of black. Mark stood up first. "I'm calling it," he said. He checked the bear box one more time. Then he tugged on the clothesline to make sure it was tight. The yellow jacket swung a little under his hand. I remember that clearly. The outside of it was facing me. The hood was down, the sleeves hung straight. Normal. We climbed into the tent a few minutes later. I zipped the door shut. And just before I turned off my headlamp, I looked through the small mesh window. The yellow jacket was still moving, very slightly. There was no wind. For the first hour, nothing happened. Or at least nothing I let myself notice. The rain settled into a steady sound above us, soft on the tarp and sharper on the tent fly. It made the whole clearing feel smaller, like the woods had moved closer once the light was gone. Mark fell asleep fast. He always did outdoors. I stayed awake longer, listening to the normal things. Water dripping from the tarp edge, small branches rubbing somewhere behind the tent, a distant owl, the low, even sound of Mark breathing beside me. I remember thinking that the jacket had probably moved because of some air current between the trees. That was the kind of explanation you give yourself when you already know it does not fit. The line outside had been tight. The trees were heavy with rain. Nothing else on that cord had moved when we looked through the mesh, only the yellow jacket. Sometime after midnight, I heard the first click. It was so small that I almost missed it. A tiny metal sound, like a carabiner tapping against a tent pole. I opened my eyes and stared at the dark roof of the tent. For a few seconds, I told myself it had been something inside. A zipper pull, a buckle on Mark's backpack. Anything close enough to explain. Then it happened again. Click. This time it came from outside, from the direction of the clothesline. I held my breath. The rain kept falling. Mark shifted once in his sleeping bag but did not wake up. I waited for another sound that would make it normal. A raccoon scratching, a branch dropping, wind moving through the needles overhead. But there was nothing, just rain. Then another click, slower, deliberate enough that my stomach tightened before I understood why. I reached over and touched Mark's shoulder. He made a tired sound and rolled away from me. I whispered his name. He did not answer. The click came again. 2 times now. Click, click, like someone testing the little plastic clips Mark had used on the line. That woke him up. He lifted his head and listened. I could barely see his face in the dark, just the pale shape of his forehead and nose. Neither of us spoke for a while. The sound stopped completely, as if whatever was out there had heard him move. Mark finally whispered raccoon. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But raccoons do not go quiet because a person inside a tent opens their eyes. He reached for his headlamp and clicked it on. The beam hit the tent wall, turning the fabric bright and thin. Shadows of pine branches stretched across it in long, broken lines. He angled the light toward the front mesh window. I leaned close and looked out. The clearing was empty. The fire ring was dark. The bear box sat at the edge of the trees with rain running down its metal side. Beyond that, the woods were just black. I could see the clothesline between the 2 pines. The yellow jacket hung there. The towel hung beside it. The socks were dark little shapes below the cord. Nothing moved. Mark kept the light on for maybe 10 seconds. Long enough for both of us to feel stupid. Then he clicked it off. The tent went black again. 3 seconds later, the sound came back. Click. Mark turned the headlamp back on so fast that the whole tent flashed white. For a second, neither of us moved. We just stared at the front wall, waiting for the sound to happen again. It did not. That bothered me more than if it had kept going. He sat up and rubbed both hands over his face. I'm checking it, he said. I told him not to. I do not remember the exact words. Probably something useless like, just leave it or wait until morning. He gave me that look people give when they are trying to be braver than they feel. Then he unzipped his sleeping bag and reached for his rain shell. The moment he touched the zipper on the tent door, I heard the cord outside shift. Not click this time, shift. A soft pull, like weight had been taken off the line. Mark froze with one hand on the zipper. We waited. Nothing. He opened the tent slowly. Cold air came in with the smell of wet pine and ash. The rain had settled into a mist. It was not loud anymore. It was the kind of rain that makes every surface shine, but does not hide sound very well. Mark stepped out first with his headlamp pointed low. I followed because staying inside alone felt worse. I kept one hand on the tent pole as I climbed out, like that thin aluminum frame could protect me from whatever had been standing outside. The clearing looked exactly the same at first. Fire ring, bear box, tarp, 2 chairs folded near the tree. Our stove covered with a plastic grocery bag. Everything normal enough that I felt embarrassed again. Then Mark turned toward the clothesline. The yellow rain jacket was inside out. Not half twisted, not blown around, fully inside out. The sleeves hung empty and dark with the wet inner lining facing us. The hood was tucked back into itself like someone had pushed it through from the outside. Mark stared at it for a long time. I said, "You didn't hang it like that." He did not answer right away. He walked closer and lifted the sleeve between 2 fingers. Water dripped from the cuff. Then he looked down at the ground under the line. The soil had turned soft from the rain. Our boot prints were obvious near the tent and around the fire ring. Heavy, messy, human. But under the clothesline there were only a few small marks near the base of the pine. They were not paw prints. They were not shoe prints either, just narrow dents in the mud, 4 or 5 of them, almost in a row. Mark crouched and looked closer. Branches, he said. There were no fallen branches there. The towel was still hanging beside the jacket. My hoodie was still there. The socks were still clipped to the cord. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing was torn. That almost made it worse. Whatever had touched the line had not been trying to take anything. It had only changed one thing. Slowly, carefully, while we listened from 10 feet away. Mark pulled the jacket down, turned it right side out, and shook it hard once. Animal, he said. Had to be. I wanted to ask what animal turned sleeves inside out. Instead, I helped him reset the line. This time, he used 2 red plastic clips from his pack, one on each shoulder of the jacket. He clipped the towel again 2 tighter than before, then tugged the cord until it hummed softly between the trees. "There," he said, but his voice was too flat. We stood there a moment longer. The woods beyond the tarp were black and still. Headlamp light caught the rain in little silver lines, but only for a few feet. Past that, there was nothing to look at, just trunks, needles, darkness. Then from somewhere behind the bear box, we heard one wet footstep. Not running, not moving away, just one step. Mark swung the headlamp toward it. The beam hit the metal bear box, the slick side of a pine, and a patch of empty ground. Nothing else. We went back into the tent without talking. Mark zipped the door and sat with his boots still on. I watched him place his camping knife beside his sleeping bag, close enough that he could reach it without moving much. Neither of us lay down. For about 15 minutes, there was only rain. Then the line outside creaked. Once, the red clips clicked together, slow, patient, like someone was learning how they worked. Mark did not turn on the headlamp this time. That was how I knew he was really scared. Before that, every strange sound had made him reach for light. Light meant checking. Checking meant control. But after the red clips clicked together outside, he just sat there in the dark with his hand near the knife and told me not to move. I could barely see him, only the outline of his shoulders against the dim gray shape of the tent wall. The rain had become soft again, almost gentle, which somehow made the other sounds clearer. Water tapped the tarp. Drops slid down the fly. Somewhere above us, a branch gave a slow, wooden groan. Then the clothesline creaked again, not from wind. It made the exact same sound it had made when Mark tugged it with his hand, a tight nylon strain, a little vibration. Then the red clips touched each other once more. Click, Mark whispered, "Don't answer it." I almost laughed because there was nothing to answer. No voice, no knock, no person asking for help. But I knew what he meant. Do not react. Do not shine the light. Do not give whatever was outside the satisfaction of knowing we were awake. We sat like that for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20. Time gets strange when you are listening for something that might be listening back. The next sound came from the side of the tent, a tap, very light. At first I thought it was rain hitting at an odd angle. Then it happened again, lower this time. Tap, a tiny pressure against the fabric. Not hard enough to push it in, just enough to make the wall twitch. Mark's hand closed around the knife handle. I stared at the spot where the sound had come from. The tent fabric was dark. I could see faint shapes moving across it from the trees outside, but nothing clear. Then another tap came from behind us, near the foot of my sleeping bag. Slow, measured, tap. The sound moved around the tent. That is the part I still hate thinking about. It was not random. It did not sound like rain. It did not sound like an animal brushing against us by accident. It moved along the outside of the tent in a wide circle, stopping every few feet. Tap, pause, tap, pause. Like someone was testing the shape of the shelter, like they wanted to understand where we were inside it. Mark leaned close enough that I could feel his breath near my ear. "If it opens the zipper," he whispered, "we run." I looked at the zipper. The little metal pull hung at the bottom of the door, still, dark, almost invisible. Outside, the tapping stopped. For a moment, there was only rain. Then the rear guy line snapped tight. The whole tent gave one hard shiver, not enough to collapse it, not enough to break anything, just one sudden pull from behind my head. I flinched so badly my shoulder hit Mark's arm. He grabbed me before I could make a sound. The line loosened again, then tightened. Slowly this time, I could hear the stake shifting in the wet dirt, a soft grinding sound, metal against mud. The back wall of the tent leaned inward by maybe an inch, then another inch. Something outside was pulling the line toward the trees. Mark moved before I did. He crawled across the tent and pressed one hand against the wall from the inside, trying to keep the fabric from bending farther. I wanted to help, but my body would not listen. I just stared over his shoulder at the black shape forming on the tent wall. It was thin, too thin to be a person standing there, too straight to be a branch. A dark vertical line appeared beside the shadow of the guy line. It did not move with the rain. It did not sway with the trees. It just stood there, narrow and still, close enough that its shadow touched the shadow of our tent. Mark saw it too. I know he did because he stopped pushing back. The line went slack all at once. The tent popped back into shape. The dark vertical shadow disappeared. Neither of us spoke. Mark crawled backward until he was beside me again. His socks were wet from where rainwater had seeped through the tent floor near the door. He did not seem to notice. For a while, nothing touched the tent. Then the clothesline outside gave one final creak. The red clips clicked twice. Click, click. After that, everything went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet where you understand that whatever is outside has not left. It has only stopped trying to prove it is there. Nothing else happened after that, or at least nothing loud enough for us to hear. That was the worst part. I kept waiting for another tap, another pull on the guy line, another click from the red clips outside, but the silence just stretched and stretched until it started to feel intentional. Mark stayed sitting with his back against the tent wall. I stayed beside him with my knees pulled up to my chest. Neither of us tried to sleep. Every few minutes, one of us would shift and the sleeping pads would make that soft plastic sound, and both of us would freeze like we had done something wrong. Around 4 in the morning, the rain finally weakened. I could hear individual drops falling from the pine needles. The tarp sagged somewhere above us and released water in heavy spills. The forest started making normal sounds again. A bird called once in the distance, then another. That should have made me feel better. It did not. Dawn came slowly, gray first, then a thin blue light through the tent fabric. Mark waited until we could see the zipper clearly before he moved. He did not say good morning. He did not make a joke. He just picked up the knife, folded it, and put it in his jacket pocket. "We pack fast," he said. I nodded. When he unzipped the door, I expected to see something right there. A person, an animal, a shape standing too close to the tent. But the clearing was empty. The fire ring was wet and black. The bear box was closed. The chairs had not moved. The tarp was sagging between the trees, heavy with rainwater. For a second, I almost felt stupid again. Then I looked at the clothesline. Everything on it had been turned inside out. The yellow jacket, my green hoodie, the blue towel, even the socks. Each one had been reversed and clipped back into place, neatly, not thrown over the cord, not tangled, arranged. The sleeves of my hoodie hung straight down, dark with rain like empty arms. The towel was folded once over the line, almost exactly in half. The red clips were gone. Mark walked over and stared at the cord. He did not touch anything at first. His face had gone flat in a way I had never seen before. He looked less scared than emptied out. Could an animal do that, I asked. He shook his head once. Not because he had an answer, because he did not want to say no. We packed without breakfast. We did not make coffee. We did not talk about staying until the road dried out. Mark shoved the wet clothes into a trash bag and left the cord tied between the trees. I took down the tent poles while he carried the cooler back toward the car. That was when I saw the mud. It was on my sleeping bag near the place where my head had been all night. A small brown smear, about 2 fingers wide, already half dry even though everything outside was soaked. At first I thought I had dragged it in on my sleeve, but my sleeves were clean. My boots had stayed near the door, and that part of the sleeping bag had never touched the ground. I wiped it with my thumb. It did not come off. There was a shape to it, not a footprint, not a paw. More like a long, narrow drag mark, as if something wet had pressed down and pulled back. I showed Mark. He looked at it once and said, "Put it in the bag." That was all. We carried everything back to the car in one trip. The trail was slick and awful, but neither of us complained. I remember looking back only once. The clearing was almost hidden by the trees already. The tarp cord was still there. The empty clothesline stretched between the pines. And for just a second, I thought I saw the yellow jacket still hanging there. But it was in the trash bag in Mark's hand. I know it was. When we got home, I washed the sleeping bag twice. Hot water, extra detergent. Then again the next day because I could still see it. The stain faded, but it never fully left. A thin brown line remained near the top seam, exactly where the mud had been. I still have that sleeping bag in a storage bin in my garage. I do not use it anymore. Sometimes I think about throwing it away. Then I think about the clothesline, the red clips, the way the tent wall bent inward while something outside tested the shape of us. And I leave it where it is, because a small part of me is afraid that if I open the bin again, the sleeping bag will be turned inside out. The gap between the trees was not there when I arrived. I know how that sounds. I also know what people say when a story starts that way. They say you were tired, they say the light changed, they say the woods look different after dark, especially when you are alone. And most of the time they are right. I have told myself all of those things. But I had been camping alone for years by then. I knew the difference between a tree shadow and movement. I knew what deer sounded like when they stepped through dry brush. I knew the high, ugly noise coyotes made when they were farther away than they sounded. I knew how the wind moved through pines in waves, starting high and then dropping lower. I was not new to being alone in the woods. That is why I still think about that campsite. It was late October in Colorado, up a Forest Service road I had driven once before during the summer. The road was rougher than I remembered. Loose rock, washboard dirt, a few deep ruts where rain had cut across the slope. I almost turned around twice, not because I was scared, but because I did not want to tear up the underside of my SUV. By the time I found the clearing, the sun was already sliding behind the ridge. The site was nothing official, just a flat patch of dirt tucked between tall pines with an old fire ring made from blackened stones and a narrow pullout big enough for one vehicle. There were no other tents, no voices, no smoke from another fire, no music. That was exactly what I wanted. I parked with the front of the SUV facing the road, because I always do that when I camp alone. It makes leaving easier if the weather changes, or if I wake up with that bad feeling you learn not to ignore. Then I set up my small two-person tent near the fire ring, rolled out my sleeping pad, and put my cooler back inside the vehicle where it would stay cold overnight. The air had that dry, sharp smell pine forests get before a cold night. I put on a fleece, unfolded my chair, and started a small fire with the wood I had brought from town. Nothing about the place felt wrong then. The tree line across from me was thick but normal, trunks close together, low brush underneath, a few dead branches caught at waist height. I remember that clearly because I checked the area before dark. There was no path, no opening, no empty space between those trees. But after the sun dropped and the last orange light faded off the trunks, I looked up from the fire and saw it, a narrow black gap, right between two pines on the far side of the clearing, too dark to be brush, too clean to be shadow. It looked like a piece of the forest had been cut out. I stared at it longer than I should have. That was my first mistake. When you are alone in the woods, you learn not to feed your own imagination. You notice something strange, you check it once, and then you move on. If you keep looking, your mind starts building things out of branches and shadows. So I looked away. I stirred the fire with a stick and told myself the answer was simple. The sun had gone down. The contrast had changed. A patch of brush that looked full in daylight could turn into a dark pocket after sunset. That happens all the time in the trees. Nothing about it needed to mean anything. I ate a turkey sandwich out of a plastic bag and drank lukewarm coffee from a thermos. I remember trying to focus on small, normal things. The foil crinkling in my hand, the smell of smoke in my fleece, the way my chair sank a little into the dirt every time I shifted my weight. But I kept knowing where that gap was. I do not mean I kept seeing it. Not exactly. I mean, even when I looked at the fire, or my boots, or the side of my SUV, some part of me still knew the exact place in the tree line where that black opening stood. That bothered me. After maybe 20 minutes, I got up to gather a few smaller sticks from the edge of the clearing. I did not need them. I had plenty of wood stacked beside the fire ring. I just wanted to move, to prove to myself that the campsite was still normal from another angle. I walked maybe 15 feet to the left and picked up a handful of dry pine branches. When I turned back toward the fire, I looked at the tree line again. The gap had moved, not far, maybe 6 or 7 feet to the right. but it was no longer between the same two pines. I knew that because the two original trees had a dead branch crossing between them like a crooked arm. That branch was still there, the dark space was not. I stood there holding the sticks, feeling stupid and cold. Then I did what people always say they would do. I checked it. I pulled my headlamp from my jacket pocket, put it on, and aimed the beam straight at the gap. The white light cut across the clearing and hit the trees hard. Pine bark, wet-looking needles, a low bush with brown leaves, a broken stump behind it. Nothing else. No opening, no person, no animal, no empty black shape. Just woods. I swept the beam slowly left and right. The original spot was normal too. So was the place where I thought the gap had moved. I even walked a few steps closer until I was standing near the edge of the clearing. The forest smelled damp and cold. The brush was thick enough that anything larger than a rabbit would have made noise moving through it. There was nothing there. I backed up more annoyed than relieved. I told myself I was tired from the drive. I told myself the firelight was doing something weird to my eyes. Then I turned off the headlamp. The clearing went dark around the fire again, and the gap came back, not where my light had just been. A little to the left of it, black, narrow, upright, as if it had stepped out of the beam and waited for me to stop looking properly. I did not move for a while. I just stood there with the headlamp in my hand and the sticks pressed against my chest, watching that thin black space between the trees. The fire cracked behind me. A little burst of sparks went up and died almost instantly. The gap did not change. It did not sway. It did not widen. It just stayed there, darker than everything around it. I forced myself to breathe out. There is a point when fear starts to embarrass you. You feel it rising, and then another part of you gets angry because there is nothing to point at. No animal, no stranger, no real threat. Just a shape your eyes do not like. I think that anger is what kept me from leaving right then. I dropped the sticks beside the fire ring and took out my phone. The camera opened slowly because my hands were cold. I aimed it at the tree line and took a picture. On the screen there was nothing unusual, just trees, brush, firelight catching the lower trunks. The place where the gap should have been looked like normal forest shadow. I zoomed in, still nothing. Then I switched to video and recorded for 10 seconds. I held the phone as steady as I could. The fire popped. Smoke drifted across the bottom of the frame. The trees stood black and ordinary beyond the clearing. When I played it back, the gap was not there. But when I lowered the phone and looked with my own eyes, it was still there. That made my skin go cold in a way the temperature had not. I told myself cameras flatten darkness. I told myself phone sensors do strange things in low light. I said it out loud, actually. Just a quiet sentence to no one. Camera can't catch it. The moment I heard myself say that, I hated how it sounded. I sat back down in the chair and tried to act normal. I fed another piece of wood into the fire. I checked the time. 8:47 p.m. Too early to go to sleep. Too late to pack up without admitting I was scared of a shadow. I opened a bag of trail mix and ate a few handfuls even though my mouth was dry. Then I moved the chair. I do not know what made me try it. Maybe I wanted to prove the angle was the problem. I picked up the folding chair, carried it to the left side of the fire ring, and sat down facing the clearing from a different position. For 2 seconds I felt better. Then I found the gap again. It was directly across from me. Not in the same place in the tree line. That was the important part. The stump I had seen earlier was now farther to the right. The dead branch was farther left. The actual trees had shifted because my angle had changed. But the gap was still centered in front of where I sat. I stood up too quickly and almost knocked the chair over. I walked around the tent next, slowly at first, then faster. I circled from the fire ring to the SUV, then around the back of the tent, then toward the pullout near the road. Every time I stopped and looked toward the trees, the dark space was there, not always between the same trunks, not always the same distance from the fire, but always in the same part of my vision, straight ahead, waiting for me to notice it. I tried turning fast. That almost worked. If I whipped my head to the side, the gap would be gone for a fraction of a second. Just trees, just night. Then, almost like my eyes needed time to load it back in, the black space would appear again, quietly, perfectly placed. That was when I stopped thinking of it as a shadow. Shadows belong to things. This did not. I stood beside the tent with my hand on the zipper and looked at my SUV. It was parked about 30 feet away, nose toward the road. Safe, solid, real. The smart thing would have been to sleep in the back seat, lock the doors, and leave at first light. I reached for the tent zipper. Before I pulled it open, I looked once more toward the trees. The gap was not there anymore. My first reaction was relief. Then I saw it. Not at the tree line. Closer. Between my tent and the SUV. I stood with my hand on the zipper and stared at the space between the tent and the SUV. It was only there for a second before my mind tried to change it into something else. A shadow from the open hatch. A strip of darkness under the trees. The empty place where the firelight did not reach. But I knew what I was seeing. It was the same narrow black gap, only now it was no longer pretending to belong to the forest. It stood in the open clearing maybe 25 feet from me, directly between the tent and the vehicle. It had no face, no shoulders, no arms, no outline I could describe honestly. It was more like a piece of the night that refused to show detail. A vertical absence, a place where my eyes kept sliding off. I clicked the headlamp on. The clearing snapped into view. Tent, dirt, fire ring, SUV, pine needles on the ground, a plastic water jug near the front tire. Nothing else. I kept the beam there for several seconds, sweeping it across the space where the gap had been. There was no one standing there, no tracks I could see from that distance, no branch, no post, no reason for that shape. Then I turned the headlamp off. The gap came back near the rear of the SUV, not in the exact same place, close enough to make my legs feel weak. I did not run. I wanted to. But I had been camping long enough to know that running in the dark through a messy campsite is how you break an ankle and turn a bad night into something worse. I moved slowly, too slowly maybe. I grabbed my sleeping bag with one hand and my phone and keys with the other. I did not bother with the pad. I did not bother with the tent. I did not even zip it shut. I walked toward the SUV without looking directly at the gap. That was impossible because it stayed in front of me anyway. Every few steps I could feel where it was, not hear it, not see it clearly. Feel it, like when someone stands too close behind you in a checkout line and your body notices before your eyes do. When I reached the SUV, I unlocked it and opened the rear passenger door. The dome light came on, weak and yellow. For 1 second, that small, ugly light felt like the best thing in the world. It made the seats look ordinary. It made the wrappers in the cup holder and the folded blanket in the back look human and stupid and safe. I threw the sleeping bag inside and climbed in after it. Then I locked the doors. The sound of the locks clicking down was almost enough to make me breathe. Almost. I sat sideways in the back seat with my knees pulled up facing the windshield. The campsite looked different from inside the vehicle. Smaller, framed. The fire had sunk low. My tent stood half open in the dark with the door flap hanging loose. I checked the windshield first. Nothing. Then the driver's side window. Nothing. Passenger side. Nothing. I told myself I had done the right thing. I would wait until morning. I would leave the tent if I had to. A tent was cheap. A sleeping pad was cheap. Pride was cheap. Then I looked at the rearview mirror. The gap was there, centered behind the vehicle. It stood between two trees at the edge of the clearing, perfectly framed in the mirror, like it had chosen that spot because it knew I would look there. I twisted around fast and stared out the rear window. There was nothing behind the SUV. Only darkness, only trees. I looked back at the mirror. It was still there. My chest tightened so hard I had to open my mouth to breathe. I reached forward and hit the dome light switch. The inside of the SUV filled with yellow light. The mirror showed the back window, the headrests, the dark tree line. No gap. I laughed once. Not because it was funny, because my body needed to make some kind of sound. That was when I saw the mark on the rear glass. A fogged patch. Small at first. Just a dull oval on the inside of the window, low on the glass behind the back seat. It looked like the kind of mark someone leaves when they breathe against cold glass. I leaned closer. The outside of the window was clear. Rain had not started again. There was no mist on the other windows, just that one patch blooming slowly from the inside. I was alone in the car. I had locked the doors. I had just climbed in. Another thin cloud of condensation appeared beside the first one. Then a third, not all at once, one after another, like slow breathing. I did not wait to see what happened next. There are moments when your brain stops asking for proof. It stops trying to label things. It stops caring whether anyone will believe you later. Mine reached that point when the third patch of breath appeared on the inside of the rear window. I climbed over the center console so fast my knee hit the gear shift. Pain shot up my leg, but I barely felt it. I landed halfway in the driver's seat, grabbed the wheel, and stabbed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over on the second try. For one awful second, the headlights lit up my open tent, the cold fire ring, and the empty space beside the SUV where the Gap had been standing. Then I put the car in drive. I left the tent there. I left the chair there. I left the sleeping pad, the center with the water jug, and half my gear scattered around that clearing. I did not care. I drove too fast at first, and the SUV bounced hard over the ruts in the dirt road. A cooler lid slammed somewhere behind me. Something rolled under the passenger seat. I kept both hands on the wheel and forced myself not to look in the rearview mirror. That was harder than it sounds. Every instinct in my body wanted to check, to see if the Gap was following, to see if that black shape was still centered between the trees behind me. But I knew that if I looked and saw it there, I might panic and wreck the car. So I stared through the windshield and drove by the narrow cone of my headlights. The road out felt longer than it had coming in. I recognized nothing. The same rocks looked wrong. The same turns seemed to come too late. Once I thought I saw a narrow, dark space standing at the edge of the road ahead between two pines. I slowed down until my tires crunched over gravel, but when the headlights reached it, there was only brush. I kept going. By the time I reached pavement, my shirt was damp with sweat under my fleece. There was still no cell service. I drove another 20 minutes before I saw the yellow glow of a small gas station off the highway. One of those places with 2 pumps, a soda machine, and a cashier window that probably had not been cleaned in years. It was almost dawn. I parked under the light and sat there with the engine running. The inside of the SUV looked normal again. Messy, but normal. My sleeping bag was piled in the back seat. My phone was on the floor. My keys were still shaking in my hand, even though the car was already on. I finally turned around. There was nothing in the back. No shape, no person, no animal, no fogged breath on the rear glass. For a few seconds, I almost let myself believe that I had made it worse in my head. Fear does that. It takes one wrong shape and builds a whole night around it. I wanted that to be true more than I have ever wanted anything. Then I got out to check the back window. The cold hit me first, then the smell of gasoline and wet asphalt. I walked around the SUV, slowly keeping one hand on the side of the vehicle like I needed to prove it was solid. The rear window looked clean from outside. No handprint, no breath mark, no mud, just my own pale reflection staring back at me under the gas station light. I opened the rear passenger door. That was when I saw it. On the inside of the glass low and to the left, there were 4 long finger marks dragged downward through a thin film of moisture. Not a full handprint, no palm, just 4 narrow lines longer than they should have been, starting close together and pulling down toward the rubber seal. I stood there with the door open looking at those marks until the gas station clerk knocked on the window from inside the store and mouthed, "You okay?" I nodded because I did not know what else to do. I wiped the glass with a paper towel from the pump island. The marks disappeared right away, too easily, like they had only been waiting for me to see them once. I never went back for the tent. A week later, I called the Ranger District and asked if anyone had turned in abandoned camping gear near that Forest Service road. The woman on the phone was polite. She asked for the location, then put me on hold for almost 5 minutes. When she came back, her voice had changed. She said that area was not closed exactly, but they had been advising people not to camp there overnight because of reports of visibility issues near the tree line. That was the phrase she used, visibility issues. I asked what that meant. She said she did not know. I still drive through forests sometimes. You cannot avoid them in Colorado. But I do not camp alone anymore, and when I pass a dark stand of pines at night, I keep my eyes on the road. Because the worst part is not seeing something between the trees. The worst part is knowing where it is without looking. The fourth shadow only showed up when the lantern faced the trees. That is the part I still cannot make sense of. Not the campsite number, not the carving we found the next morning, not even what Ellie said when we were packing the car. It was the way the shadow obeyed the light, but not the room. Like it knew where the lantern was pointed, like it was waiting for us to point it in the wrong direction. That trip was supposed to be ordinary. My wife Megan had been saying for months that Ellie needed a weekend away from screens. Ellie was 8, then old enough to complain about boredom, young enough to still believe every sound outside a tent meant something was coming to eat us. I told her camping was only scary in movies. Real camping was cold hands, bad coffee, damp socks, and your dad pretending he knew how to start a fire faster than he actually did. We drove out to a campground in Washington on a Saturday afternoon near the edge of a national forest. It was not deep backcountry. That mattered to me. I had taken Ellie camping twice before, and both times we stayed close to bathrooms and other families. This place had reservations online, marked sites, fire rings, a camp host, and a little check-in booth at the entrance. Safe enough to feel remote. Remote enough to feel like a real trip. At least that was how it looked on the website. When we arrived, the booth was closed. Not abandoned, just closed. There was a faded sign taped to the window that said the host was making rounds and to check the reservation board. A wooden board stood beside the booth, with envelopes pinned under a sheet of cloudy plastic. Most of the slots were empty. Ours was near the bottom. Harris Site 12. It was written in pencil, block letters. My last name looked darker than the rest, as if someone had pressed too hard. Megan smiled and said, "At least it's not 13. I laughed because that was the kind of joke you make when nothing is wrong yet. The campground loop was quieter than I expected. The first few sites had RVs in them. One had a blue tarp over a picnic table. Another had a pickup truck with fishing poles leaned against the tailgate. But the farther we drove, the emptier it got. The road narrowed. The trees pressed closer. By the time we found Site 12, we were at the far bend of the loop, where the pavement turned rough and the forest looked much darker than it had near the entrance. The wooden post was the first thing I noticed. A short square post near the gravel pad painted brown with the number 12 in white. It leaned slightly toward the road. Around the number were old knife scratches, not words, not at first glance, just cuts in the wood. Some shallow, some dark with age. The kind of marks bored teenagers make when they have a pocket knife and no supervision. Megan was already looking at the picnic table, wiping pine needles off one side with her sleeve. Ellie stood beside the car with her backpack on, staring past the fire ring toward the trees. What I asked her, she pointed at the campsite without lifting her arm all the way. Are there supposed to be 4 of us? I looked around. Megan, Ellie, me. The tent bag on the ground, the cooler in the trunk, the empty picnic table, the fire ring, the post marked 12. No one else. I forced a little laugh and said, "Only if your mom packed a secret brother." Ellie did not laugh. She kept looking toward the trees behind the post, and for the first time I noticed how Site 12 faced the forest directly, like the whole campsite had been arranged to look into something dark. I asked Ellie what she meant, but she had already looked away. That was one of her habits at that age. She would say something strange, then act like the rest of us were the strange ones for reacting to it. Megan gave me a look that meant do not make it a thing, so I did not. We unloaded the car. That helped. Ordinary work always helps at first. I pulled the tent bag out of the trunk and set it near the flat dirt pad. Megan put the cooler on the picnic table. Ellie was put in charge of the sleeping bags, which mostly meant dragging them halfway across the gravel and complaining that they were too big. The sun was still up, but the trees around Site 12 were tall enough to cut the light early. Everything had a green-gray tint like the evening had arrived there before the rest of the campground. The site itself was normal if you did not stare at it too long. Gravel pad, picnic table, fire ring. A bear box about 30 feet back closer to the tree line than I liked. A narrow trail disappeared behind it, though there was no sign marking where it went. I told myself it was probably just a shortcut to another loop or a maintenance path for the host. The post marked 12 stood near the front edge of the site facing the road. Every time I carried something past it, I noticed the scratches around the number. There were more than I had seen at first. Some crossed over each other, some curved downward. A few looked almost deliberate, but not enough to read. I remember thinking I should tell the camp host about it in the morning, not because it scared me, because it made the site look neglected. Megan found the reservation slip tucked inside the envelope from the check-in board and set it on the picnic table. It was damp at the edges, soft from moisture. Under my last name, the site number had been written again. Site 12. Below that were 3 lines for occupants. Daniel Harris, Megan Harris, Ellie Harris. A 4th line sat underneath them, but it was smeared. The pencil had blurred into a gray streak like someone had written a name and rubbed it away with a wet thumb. I stared at it a little too long. Megan noticed. What? Nothing, I said. Paper got wet. She looked once and shrugged. Looks like every campground form ever. She was right. That was the annoying thing. Every detail had a reasonable explanation if you wanted one badly enough. Closed booth, damp paper, scratched post, empty loop. An 8-year-old saying something weird after a long drive. None of it was enough to leave, not with the tent half up and the sun already dropping. By the time we finished setting up, the fire ring was full of kindling, and Ellie was cold enough to stop pretending she hated the trip. Megan gave her a packet of hot chocolate and told her she could help arrange the inside of the tent. That made her happy. She always liked small spaces once they were lit. I hung the little battery lantern from the loop at the top of the tent. It was one of those cheap plastic ones with 3 brightness settings and a yellow-white glow. Not strong enough to light a campsite, enough to make a child feel safe. Ellie crawled inside and immediately started claiming the middle sleeping bag. Megan laughed and said, "Of course you get the middle." I stood outside the tent door, tightening one of the stakes. Through the thin fabric, I could see their shadows move inside. Megan's larger shape bending over, Ellie's smaller one bouncing on her knees. Normal shadows, soft at the edges, warped by the fabric. Then I saw another one. For a second I thought it was mine. A 3rd shadow stood near them, taller than Ellie and narrower than Megan. It was close to the back wall of the tent, where the lantern light faded toward the trees. I straightened up. The shadow did not move with me. That was when I remembered I was standing outside on the wrong side of the light. I called Megan's name. Her shadow turned. Ellie's shadow looked up. The 3rd shadow stayed still. I opened the tent so quickly that the zipper caught halfway down. Megan looked at me from inside, annoyed more than worried. Ellie was kneeling on her sleeping bag with one sock in her hand. The lantern swung gently above them from where I had disturbed the tent wall. There was no one else inside. Of course there was no one else inside. That was the first thing I told myself. The tent was small. A 2-room family tent would have made the moment easier to explain, but ours was not that. It was just large enough for 3 sleeping bags, 2 duffels, and the little pile of stuffed animals Ellie had insisted on bringing. There was nowhere for anyone to stand without being seen. Nowhere to hide. No second door. Megan said, "What's wrong?" I looked past her at the back corner of the tent. The fabric was empty now, just yellow light and folded shadows from the sleeping bags. I thought I saw something, I said. Ellie stopped moving. Megan noticed that before I did. Her face changed slightly, and she spoke in that calm voice parents use when they are trying not to hand their fear to a child. "Like what?" "A shadow," I said. "Probably mine." Megan looked at the open door behind me, then at the lantern hanging overhead. She knew the angle did not make sense. I saw that in her face. But she also knew Ellie was listening. "Tree branches," Megan said. "The light is weird in here." That was a good enough answer, or it needed to be. We went back to normal because normal was easier. I finished staking the tent. Megan unpacked the food. Ellie put her stuffed rabbit near her pillow and announced that the middle sleeping bag was officially hers. We made hot dogs over the fire ring and ate chips from the bag. Megan burned one side of a bun and blamed me for buying cheap firewood from the gas station. Ellie drank hot chocolate from a metal cup with both hands and got marshmallow on her sleeve. For a while it worked. The campground stayed quiet, but not unnaturally quiet. Somewhere down the loop, a truck door closed. A dog barked twice far away. Smoke moved low through the sight and made my eyes water. The ordinary sounds gave the place shape again. I almost convinced myself I had imagined the shadow. Then Ellie went into the tent to change into warmer clothes. Megan stayed outside with me at the picnic table, sorting trash into a grocery bag. I was kneeling near the fire ring, pushing wet ash away from the flames with a stick. The lantern inside the tent was still on low. Through the fabric, I could see Ellie's small shadow moving around as she pulled her hoodie over her head. Behind her, another shadow appeared. This one was taller than Megan, too tall for Ellie, too still to be a bag or a sleeping pad leaning against the wall. It stood near the back of the tent, angled forward slightly, the way an adult bends down when they are trying to hear a child whisper. My hand tightened around the stick until it snapped. Megan looked up at the sound. Daniel. I did not answer. I crossed the campsite in 3 steps and pulled the tent open. Ellie was alone. She turned toward me with the hoodie halfway over one shoulder, confused and irritated. Dad. I looked behind her. I looked at the corners. I pushed one duffel aside with my foot. Nothing. No person, no shape, no reason for a tall shadow to have been standing over her. Megan came up behind me. What happened? I still did not want to say it. Saying it would make it real. Worse, it would make Ellie afraid, and I had spent the whole drive telling her there was nothing to be afraid of. Ellie pulled her hoodie down and looked from me to Megan. Then she asked, "Was Mom behind me?" Megan went still. I said no. She was outside with me. Ellie frowned, not scared yet, just trying to solve something in the serious way children do. "Oh," she said. "Why?" Megan asked. Ellie pointed toward the back wall of the tent. Because her shadow was too tall. None of us spoke after that. For a few seconds, the only sound was the lantern's faint plastic buzz and the fire popping behind us. Then a breeze moved through the tree line, and the tent fabric trembled softly, as if something on the other side had exhaled against it. I reached up and turned the lantern off. The whole tent went dark. Ellie immediately said she wanted it back on. I told her we would use flashlights for a while. I said it like that was normal. Like parents turn off lanterns in the middle of a family camping trip for no reason. Like I was not afraid of what the light might show us next. We left the lantern off for almost an hour. That was the compromise I made with myself. Flashlights only. No warm glow through the tent, no clear shadows on the fabric. Ellie complained at first, then forgot about it, once Megan gave her a deck of cards and let her win 2 games of Go Fish on the picnic table. I kept pretending to be involved, but most of my attention stayed on the tent behind us. Without the lantern, it looked harmless, just a dark shape beside the fire ring. Nylon walls, rainfly, stakes in the dirt. The kind of thing every family has in photos from trips they barely remember. The problem was the post. Site 12 sat just beyond the reach of our firelight, close enough to see the white numbers, far enough that everything below them disappeared into shadow. I kept catching it in the corner of my eye. Every time the fire shifted, the numbers seemed to brighten for a second, then fade back again. I knew it was just paint reflecting the flames. I knew that. But it gave the post a strange pulse, like it was waiting for us to look away before leaning closer. Megan noticed me staring. "We can sleep in the car," she said quietly, while Ellie sorted cards. I wanted to say yes. I almost did. But the SUV was packed tight with gear. The back seat was full of food bags and blankets, and Ellie was already exhausted. The temperature was dropping fast. The car would be colder than the tent within an hour unless we kept turning it on. I also did not want to teach Ellie that every shadow meant we had to run. That sounds foolish now. At the time, it felt like parenting. "We'll be okay," I said. Megan did not argue. That worried me more than if she had. Around 10, Ellie started yawning hard enough that her eyes watered. She asked if the lantern could be on just until she fell asleep. Megan looked at me. I looked at the tent. Then I made the kind of decision that looks reasonable until you tell the story later. I said yes, but I told Ellie we would keep it low. Inside the tent, I hung the lantern again from the center loop and turned it to the lowest setting. The glow spread across the sleeping bag, soft and yellow. Nothing happened. No extra shadow, no tall shape in the corner. Megan gave me a look that almost said see, and for a few minutes I let myself believe the problem had been angle and fear and too much attention. Then Ellie said the light was in her eyes. I reached up and turned the lantern slightly. Not much, just enough to aim it away from her face. The beam shifted toward the back wall of the tent, toward the trees. That was when the fourth shadow came back, faint at first, almost nothing. A vertical darkening beside the seam where the rear wall met the floor. I froze with my fingers still on the lantern handle. Megan saw my face and turned slowly. The shadow grew clearer, not sharper. Clearer is the wrong word. It became more certain, like our eyes were accepting it piece by piece. A long, narrow shape, taller than me, standing behind the place where Ellie's head would be when she lay down. I turned the lantern back toward the door. The shadow faded. I turned it toward the sleeping bags. Gone. I turned it slightly back toward the trees. It returned. Megan whispered, "Stop." I stopped. Ellie was watching both of us now. Her face had gone small and pale in the yellow light. She did not ask what was wrong. Children always know when the adults are lying to them. I lowered the lantern from the hook and held it in my hand. I tested it again because some stubborn part of me still needed a normal answer. Door side. Nothing. Floor. Nothing. Back wall. There. A weak, tall shadow. Not cast by us. Not cast by any bag. Not cast by the tent pole. It only showed up when the lantern faced the tree line. Megan put a hand over Ellie's eyes and said, "Daniel." That brought me back. I turned the lantern off. The tent went black except for the pale shapes of the mesh windows. I could hear Ellie starting to cry quietly. Not loud, not dramatic. Just small breathy sounds she was trying to hold in. I told her it was okay. I told Megan it was probably something outside reflecting the light. I said both things because I needed them to be true. Then through the front mesh, Megan looked past my shoulder. She did not scream. She only leaned closer to me and whispered, "Was that post always that close?" I turned toward the door. The campsite post marked 12 stood outside in the dark white numbers facing us. I knew it had not moved. Wooden posts do not move. But from inside the tent with the lantern off and the fire nearly dead, the number looked bigger than before. Closer. Like the campsite itself had shortened the distance while we were not watching. I did not go outside right away. That is the part I want to be clear about. If I had been alone, maybe I would have done something stupid. Maybe I would have stepped out with the flashlight and tried to prove the post had not moved. But I was not alone. Megan was in the tent. Ellie was in the tent. And every decision I made after that had to pass through one question first. Does this make them safer? The answer was not simple. Running to the car felt obvious until I thought about actually doing it. The SUV was maybe 40 feet away, parked near the gravel pad, but the fire was almost out and the campground loop had no lights. Ellie was already shaking. Megan would have to carry the blankets and guide her through the dark while I held the flashlight. If someone was outside the tent, we would be walking straight into open space. If nothing was outside, we would be dragging a terrified child into a colder car because of something I could still not prove. Calling the camp host would have been my first choice. I tried. No signal, not one bar. Megan tried too, holding her phone up near the mesh window like that might help. Nothing. The campground map said the host site was near the entrance, but that was a long walk through the loop in the dark. Too long with Ellie. Too stupid without knowing what we were walking toward. So we did the only thing that made sense at the time. We stopped using the lantern. I turned it off and put it in the bottom of my duffel. Megan took Ellie's flashlight and kept the beam pointed down at the sleeping bags, never toward the back wall of the tent. I zipped the tent door all the way closed. Then I placed my car keys, bear spray, and flashlight beside my right hand. If we had to move, we would move fast. But we would not stumble out just because our eyes were making us doubt the distance to a wooden post. That was the plan. It lasted maybe 10 minutes. Ellie had stopped crying by then. She was lying between us, awake but quiet, with Megan's arm over her. I was sitting up with my back against a duffel, watching the front mesh and the white number 12 beyond it. The number did not come closer again. It just stayed there, too visible, too centered. Then something touched the outside of the tent, not the wall. The stake line near the back, a soft pull. The tent did not shake much, just enough for the rear seam to tighten and relax. I looked at Megan. She had heard it too. We both waited for wind. There was none. The line pulled again. This time I heard the metal stake scrape in the dirt. That changed things. A shadow could be bad light. A child could misunderstand what she saw. A scratched post could be old damage. But a tent stake moving in the ground was physical. Something outside had touched our shelter. I whispered for Megan to get Ellie's shoes on. She did not ask why. She just moved. I kept my flashlight off and listened. Another slow scrape came from the back of the tent. Then a soft sound like fingers sliding along wet nylon. Ellie made a small noise, and Megan pressed her hand gently over her mouth before she could speak. I unzipped the tent just enough to look out. I did not stick my head through. I did not step out. I only opened a narrow gap and angled the flashlight beam low across the ground. The beam caught the picnic table legs first, then the cold fire ring, then the gravel near the car. Nothing. I moved the light toward the back of the tent. There were drag marks in the dirt, fresh ones. 2 thin lines curved from the rear stake toward the campsite post. They cut through the pine needles and stopped near the base of the post marked 12. The stake itself was still in the ground, but it had been pulled halfway sideways, leaving a dark groove where the metal had shifted through wet soil. That was enough. "We're going to the car," I whispered. Megan nodded. I gave her the keys because if anything happened to me, she needed to be the one who could drive. I took the bear spray. Then I opened the tent and stepped out first, sweeping the flashlight low, not into the trees. I did not want to see the fourth shadow. I wanted to see ground, shoes, legs, a person, something real enough to react to. There was nothing. Megan moved behind me with Ellie wrapped in a sleeping bag. We did not bring the duffels. We did not bring the cooler. We did not bring the lantern. We crossed the campsite in a tight line fast, but not running because the gravel was uneven and Ellie kept tripping on the edge of the sleeping bag. We were halfway to the SUV when Megan stopped. I turned back ready to tell her to keep moving. She was looking at the tent. The flashlight in her hand had swung up by accident. Its beam hit the tent wall from the outside, and there were 4 shadows inside. 3 low shapes near the sleeping bags, and 1 tall one standing at the back. But we were all outside. I grabbed Ellie under one arm and pulled both of them toward the SUV. Megan unlocked it, shoved Ellie into the back seat and climbed in after her. I got into the driver's seat and hit the locks. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. The tent stood in the headlights, now half open, empty, glowing pale in the beam. Megan was crying silently in the back seat. Ellie had her face buried against her coat. I turned the key halfway to check the dashboard. The tank was almost full. The road out was dark, narrow, and bordered by trees on both sides. I wanted to leave immediately. Then Ellie whispered, "Dad." I looked at her in the rearview mirror. She was not looking at me. She was looking past me through the windshield, at the campsite post. The number 12 faced the car, and beneath the white numbers and the scratches I had thought were old, I could finally read one line. "Keep it facing the road." I did not understand it then. I only understood that the lantern was still inside the tent, and the tent door was facing the trees. I started the SUV and drove out of Site 12 without turning around. That sounds simple, but it was not. The campground loop was narrow, and the headlights kept catching trunks too close to the road. Every curve looked like it might lead us back to the same campsite. I kept the speed low because Ellie was in the back seat without a proper blanket. Megan was shaking too badly to speak, and the last thing I wanted was to slide into a ditch trying to escape something I still could not explain. I did not look at the tent in the mirror. I wanted to. That was the terrible part. I wanted proof. I wanted to see whether the fourth shadow was still inside, whether the tent was still open, whether the post was still facing us. But wanting proof is not the same as needing it. We had Ellie in the car, we had keys, we had gas. The only useful decision was to leave. The first loop sign came up on the left, then the restroom building, then 2 RVs near the entrance with their porch lights on. I had never been so relieved to see other people sleeping. I parked near the closed check-in booth and tried my phone again. 1 bar appeared, then vanished. Megan's phone got nothing. I left the engine running for heat and walked only as far as the booth window, close enough that Megan could still see me from the car. The host sign was still there, making rounds. Please check board. There was no emergency number posted, just a faded campground map, a list of quiet hours, and a plastic holder full of wet brochures. I knocked on the booth anyway. No answer. We waited there until the sky began to turn gray. I know some people will say we should have driven straight out of the campground. Maybe they are right. But the road out twisted along a drop-off for the first mile, and I did not trust myself to drive it in the dark with my hands shaking. Waiting near the entrance beside other campers with the car locked and running felt safer than forcing the mountain road before dawn. That was the choice. Not brave, not cinematic, just the least bad option. At first light, we left. I drove until we got a signal, then called the ranger district from a gas station parking lot. I said there might have been someone at our campsite overnight. I said our tent had been tampered with. I did not mention the fourth shadow. I did not mention the lantern. I did not mention Ellie asking about 4 people. I made it sound like a person had been messing with us because that was the only version that belonged in a phone call. The ranger on the phone took it seriously. That helped more than I expected. He asked if anyone was hurt. He asked if we were safe. He told us not to return to the site alone and said someone would check it that morning. A few hours later, he called me back. He said they found our tent at Site 12. The door was open. The lantern was still inside. The rear stake had been pulled halfway out of the ground just like I had seen. There were drag marks in the dirt behind the tent running toward the campsite post. No clear footprints, no sign of another camper, no damage to the car pad or bear box. Then he paused. I could hear papers moving on his end of the line. He asked me if we had carved anything into the post. I said no. He asked if I was sure. I said I was. He told me there was a fresh line cut into the wood under the number 12. He said the wood was lighter there, like it had been carved recently. He read it once slowly because he said the wording was odd. Don't face the lantern toward the trees. I did not say anything for a few seconds. Then I told him we wanted our gear thrown away, all of it. He said they could dispose of the tent and anything inside, but we would have to file a report if we wanted documentation for insurance. I said fine. I gave him my email. A week later, the report came through. It listed possible vandalism. It mentioned disturbed soil, a loose tent stake, and abandoned property. It mentioned old carvings on the campsite marker. It did not mention the new sentence. I called and asked about that. The ranger who answered was not the same one I had spoken with before. She put me on hold. When she came back, she said the post at Site 12 had been replaced 2 days after our report because of excessive damage. She said there were no photos attached to the file. That should have been the end of it. For Megan, it almost was. She did not want to talk about the trip again, and I did not push her. Ellie had nightmares for a few weeks, then less often. Then only when she saw lanterns in stores or cartoons. She refused to sleep with a nightlight facing her closet. She always turned it toward the door. About a month later, her teacher sent home a folder of class drawings. Most of them were normal kid stuff: a house, a dog, a pumpkin patch. Then I found the camping one. The drawing showed a tent, a yellow lantern, a brown post with the number 12, 3 people lying in sleeping bags, and 1 tall person standing in the corner. The figure had no face, just a long dark body and arms held too close to its sides. I asked Ellie who it was. She did not look scared when she answered. That was somehow worse. She said that's the shadow that didn't know where to stand yet. I asked her what that meant. She shrugged and went back to eating cereal. I did not keep the drawing. I threw it away that night, folded inside an empty cereal box so Megan would not see it. I regret that sometimes. Not because I want proof. I am done wanting proof. I regret it because I still remember one detail from the picture. The lantern was not facing the shadow. It was facing out of the tent, toward the trees. The fire ring was 10 feet from our tent when we went to sleep. I measured it later in my head more times than I want to admit. 10 feet, maybe 12. Far enough that the heat never reached the tent wall. Far enough that none of us could have kicked a stone loose by accident once we were inside. That distance matters because by morning, the fire ring was not in front of our tent anymore. It was around it. This happened during my second year at school in Tennessee. It was early October, the kind of weekend where everyone suddenly wanted to do something outdoors because the heat had finally broken. My roommate Mason found the spot on a hiking forum. Not an official campground, not backcountry exactly, just a primitive site off a forest road close to a creek far enough from the main campground that we would not have to listen to generators or drunk families arguing over folding chairs. There were 3 of us, me, Mason, and Claire, who was in one of my biology labs. Claire was not reckless. That is important. She was the person who brought extra socks, a first aid kit, water purification tablets, and a printed map, even though Mason had the offline route saved on his phone. Mason liked to act like he knew everything about camping, but Claire was the one who checked the weather twice before we left. The road in was rough, but passable. We parked at a small pullout beside the forest road, because the last stretch narrowed into something more like a hiking trail. From there, we carried our gear in by hand. It took about 10 minutes, not a long walk. Long enough that the car felt inconvenient once it got dark. The campsite looked used but not trashed. A flat clearing under tall hardwoods. A fallen log that worked like a bench. A thin trail leading down toward the creek. And an old fire ring made from dark, heavy stones with black ash packed in the center. Someone had left 2 half-burned beer cans in it. Mason said that was how you knew the spot was real. Claire did not laugh. She walked around the clearing once before we unpacked. She checked the trees above us for dead limbs. She checked the slope behind the tent site. Then she said it was fine as long as we kept food sealed and did not leave trash out. That made me feel better. The 3 of us being there made me feel better too. Nobody was alone. We had headlamps, bear spray, a full power bank, and enough gas in the car to leave whenever we wanted. That is how places get you, I think. They give you just enough reasons to feel reasonable. We set the tent about 10 feet back from the fire ring facing the creek trail. Mason said that way, smoke would drift away from the door. Claire made him move it twice because the first spot had roots under the floor. By the time we got everything right, the sky had turned orange through the trees. We cooked ramen over a small fire and ate from the pots because nobody wanted to wash bowls in creek water. Mason kept poking at the coals with a stick. At one point, he knocked one of the fire ring stones with his boot and said, "These things are barely set." I remember looking down. One stone near the edge had shifted out of line, not far, just a few inches. It left a black crescent in the ash where it had been. Claire noticed it too. "Put it back before somebody trips," she said. Mason nudged it with his boot until it looked mostly right again. Nothing about that seemed strange. Not yet. After dinner, we sat on the fallen log and let the fire burn low. The woods were quiet in a normal way. Crickets, water moving somewhere below us, the occasional crack of a branch cooling in the fire. Around 9, Claire stood up and stretched, then pointed toward the ground between the fire ring and our tent. "Did one of you move that?" I followed her finger. One of the blackened stones was sitting halfway between the fire ring and the tent door. Alone, wet ash still clung to one side of it, like it had just been turned over. None of us answered Claire right away. That was the first moment the campsite stopped feeling like a cheap weekend trip and started feeling like a place we had misunderstood. The stone was not small. It was one of the larger ones from the fire ring, dark on one side from years of smoke and pale gray on the other, where rain had washed it clean. It sat on the dirt between the fire and the tent, as neatly as if someone had placed it there. Mason walked over first. He crouched and touched it with 2 fingers, then pulled his hand back like he expected it to be hot. It was not. The fire had been low for a while, and that stone had been near the outer edge of the ring. Still black ash stuck to the damp side facing the tent. "I probably kicked it," Mason said. Claire gave him a look. "You kicked that 6 feet. He did not like that." I could tell because he stood up too fast and started looking around the clearing with his headlamp. It could have rolled. The ground did slope slightly from the fire ring toward the tent. Not much. Enough that the explanation was not impossible if you wanted it to work. The stone was rounder than the others too, almost like a river rock. Mason nudged it with his boot and it shifted with a heavy scrape. Claire did not move closer. That doesn't roll by itself. No, I said, but maybe we dragged it when we moved the cooler earlier. That was not true, and I knew it while I said it. The cooler had never gone near the fire ring, but I also knew what Claire was really asking without saying it. Are we leaving? And at that point, leaving felt dramatic. It was one stone. Nobody had seen anyone. We had not heard footsteps. The car was 10 minutes away through a dark trail full of roots and loose rock. We had fire, 3 people bear spray phones, and enough light. There was not enough evidence yet to panic, so we checked. Mason swept his headlamp across the trees. I walked to the edge of the clearing with mine pointed low, looking for boot prints or fresh tracks. Claire checked the food bags and made sure the trash was sealed. Nothing was missing. The cooler was zipped. The first aid kit was still on top of Claire's pack. The trail toward the creek was empty. No voices, no movement, no lights deeper in the woods. Near the fire ring, the dirt was too messy to read clearly. Our own footprints were everywhere. Mason's boot prints, Claire's smaller hiking shoes, my worn-out trail runners. There were a few marks I could not place, but that did not mean much. Primitive sites get used by strangers all season. Every patch of bare ground already had a history before we arrived. Mason kicked the stone back toward the ring. Then he bent down and used both hands to set it where he thought it belonged. Claire watched him do it. "Take a picture," she said. Mason laughed once, for evidence. "For tomorrow," she said. "So we know if we're being stupid." I liked that. It made the situation feel controlled, measured, not fear, just documentation. Mason pulled out his phone and took 2 photos of the fire ring from the tent door. In the second one, he crouched lower, so the whole ring and the front of the tent were in frame. Then he held the screen up for us to see. Normal fire ring, tent behind it, nothing strange. That helped. We let the fire burn down and went into the tent around 10. Mason slept on the side closest to the door because he said he was the tallest and could fight the raccoons. Claire took the middle. I took the far side where the tent wall sloped down close to my shoulder. We kept our shoes lined up inside the door and put the bear spray where any of us could reach it. That was another thing people leave out when they tell stories like this. We did not go to sleep helpless. We prepared for the version of danger that made sense. For maybe 40 minutes, everything was quiet. Mason checked his phone, then complained there was no signal. Claire told him to save battery. I lay there listening to the creek below us and the last pieces of wood collapsing in the fire ring outside. Then came the scrape. Slow, heavy, stone against dirt. All 3 of us heard it. Mason's phone screen went dark in his hand. Claire sat up so quickly her sleeping bag hissed against the tent floor. The scrape came again, longer this time, from somewhere near the fire ring. Not a crash, not a roll, a controlled dragging sound, like someone pulling weight with both hands and stopping before it made too much noise. Mason whispered, "Nope." I reached for my headlamp but did not turn it on right away. Claire grabbed my wrist and whispered, "Don't stick your head out." She was right. I unzipped the tent only at the bottom, just enough to make a narrow opening near the ground. Then I angled the headlamp beam through it low across the dirt. The light caught the cold edge of the fire ring first, except it was not a ring anymore. 3 stones had shifted out of place, maybe 4. They formed a rough curve pointing away from the old fire pit and toward the tent door. The closest stone sat less than 4 feet from where our shoes were lined up inside. Claire made a sound in her throat. Mason opened the photo on his phone with shaking fingers, the one he had taken less than an hour earlier. The fire ring in the picture was normal, complete, every stone in place. Then Mason zoomed in. At the back corner of the tent in the photo, just barely visible in the dark, one blackened stone was already sitting beside the fabric, before any of us had noticed it outside. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. Mason kept the phone in one hand and the headlamp beam on the stones with the other. The picture on his screen showed the fire ring the way it had been before we got into the tent. The real ground outside showed something else. The difference between those 2 things made my chest feel hollow. Claire was the first one to speak. "We're leaving." I wanted to agree immediately. I think both of us did. But wanting to leave and being able to leave safely were not the same thing. The car was not right outside the tent. It was back through the trail past the creek crossing, past the narrow part where the roots came up through the dirt. During the day, it had taken 10 minutes with backpacks and both hands free. At night, with adrenaline and someone or something moving stones around us, that trail felt much longer. Mason whispered, "I'm going out." "No," Claire said. "I just need to see if somebody's messing with us." "No," she said again, sharper this time. I backed her up before Mason could argue. "We don't split up." That annoyed him. I could hear it in his breathing. Mason was scared, and his version of scared looked like wanting to do something physical. Open the tent, shine the light, yell into the trees, prove there was a person out there so the fear could become anger. I understood that feeling. I also knew it was a bad idea. If someone was outside, we did not know how many. We did not know where they were standing. We did not know if they wanted us out of the tent. And if it was not a person, then stepping outside to look brave would not help us understand it any faster. So we made a plan in whispers. We would stay together. We would keep the light off unless we needed it. We would get our shoes on. We would put phones, keys, bear spray, and Claire's first aid kit within reach. If the stones moved closer to the door, we would leave immediately. If nothing else happened before first light, we would pack only what we could grab fast and get back to the car. That sounds calm when I say it now. It did not feel calm. The tent was too small for 3 people trying to move quietly. Mason reached for his shoes near the door. I reached over Claire to grab my backpack. Claire shifted backward to make room for both of us, and her foot caught under the corner of the cooler bag we had shoved against the tent wall. She slipped sideways and hit her ankle hard against the metal stake bag. The sound she made was small but real. Mason froze. I turned on my headlamp for 1 second, angled down, and saw her clutching her left ankle with both hands. "Can you walk?" I whispered. She nodded too fast. "Yes." But when she tried to move her foot, her face tightened. It was already swelling near the outside bone. Not broken, I didn't think, but painful enough that running was out. Even walking fast through the dark trail would be difficult. That changed the math again. Before that, leaving was dangerous, but possible. Now leaving meant one of us helping Claire over roots and loose rock, while the other watched the trees. It meant moving slowly. It meant we might make noise. It meant if someone was waiting outside the clearing, we would be easier to follow. Claire knew it too. I could see the anger in her face. She hated being the reason we hesitated. "I can do it," she whispered. "I know," I said, but I did not tell her to stand yet. Outside, the scraping started again. This time it was not one stone. It was several. The sound came in short, controlled pulls. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. Each one heavy enough to press through the tent fabric as vibration before it reached my ears. The old fire ring was being dismantled piece by piece. Mason turned his head slowly toward the door. "Do you hear how close that is?" he whispered. I did. The closest scrape came from just beyond the front seam of the tent, maybe 3 feet away, maybe less. I could picture the stones out there in a curved line, blackened sides facing us, each one being dragged into place by hands we could not see. Claire's breathing started to get quick. I handed her my water bottle, not because she needed water, but because it gave her something to hold that was not fear. Mason had the bear spray now. He kept his thumb near the safety, but did not point it at the door. That was good. That meant he was listening. Then came a different sound, a stone being set down, not dropped, placed. A soft final thud against the dirt outside the tent. Then another. The pattern was wrong. Too careful for an animal. Too quiet for someone drunk. Too close for wind or loose ground. Whatever was moving those stones was not rushing. It had all night. Mason leaned toward me and whispered, "It's not trying to get in." I knew what he meant. The zipper had not moved. No one had touched the door. Nothing had pressed against the tent wall. The stones were the whole point. Claire looked from him to me. "Then what is it doing?" I opened the zipper at the bottom again, slower this time, and aimed my headlamp through the gap for less than a second. That was enough. The stones no longer formed a line from the fire ring. They formed part of a circle, around us. I closed the zipper before Mason or Claire could lean forward to look. I did not want all 3 of us staring through the same little gap, breathing too loud, waiting for whatever was outside to notice the opening. I had seen enough. The stones were not scattered anymore. They were not accidentally displaced. They were being arranged. A circle is not a natural shape when it appears slowly in the dark. Mason whispered. How much of it? I tried to answer, but my mouth had gone dry. I held up one hand and made a curved motion with my finger. Maybe half, maybe more. I had only looked for a second, and my headlamp had caught the nearest stones first. 3 of them sat just outside the tent door. One was close enough that if the fabric sagged, it would have touched. Claire closed her eyes. I could tell she was trying not to cry, and that scared me more than if she had panicked. Claire was practical. She was the one who had made us check the weather. She was the one who had told Mason to take a picture. If she looked hopeless, then the situation had become real. I took out my phone and opened the camera. Not because I wanted proof for later. I wanted to see without leaving the tent. I pushed the bottom of the zipper open again, less than 2 inches, and held the phone low to the ground with the screen angled away from the door. The camera showed mostly dirt at first, then the edge of a stone, then another. I hit record. The image was shaky, but clear enough. The fire ring stones had been dragged across the clearing in arcs. Black streaks of ash marked the dirt where each one had moved. Pine needles had been scraped into little ridges. There were grooves in the wet soil, long and dark, running from the old fire pit toward the tent. No footprints. That was the first thing I noticed. Our own prints were everywhere closer to the tent, but in the fresh drag marks there were no clear boot soles. No heel, no tread, no paw marks either, just the stones and the lines they had made. Then the sound came again. Scrape. The phone picked it up. I know it did because I watched the little audio line jump on the screen. The scrape came from the right side of the tent, somewhere near Claire's feet. She flinched hard and Mason reached across to steady her. Another stone touched the fabric. Not hard. It just pressed the nylon inward at the very bottom, a slow bulge against the tent wall. Then the pressure released. A second later, something heavy settled outside with a low, careful thud. Claire whispered, "We can't stay." She was right. The rational excuses were gone. This was not loose ground. This was not an animal. This was not us misremembering where the stones had been. Something was moving heavy objects around our shelter while we were inside it. I stopped recording and pulled the phone back. For 1 second I watched the video. The picture showed the drag marks and the closest stones. But when the scraping sound happened, the audio was wrong. There was no heavy stone noise, just crickets. Claire breathing. My own hand sliding against the tent floor. I replayed the last few seconds. Still no scrape. The video had seen the ground. It had not kept the sound. I did not tell them that. It would not help. Instead, I told them the plan. Claire would go first after me. I would open the door and check the ground with the flashlight pointed low. Mason would come last with the bear spray. We would not take the tent. We would not take the cooler. We would not take anything we had to carry with both hands. Phones, keys, first aid kit, that was it. Claire tried to stand and almost fell. Mason caught her under one arm. I handed her my hiking pole from beside the sleeping bag. She tested weight on her ankle and nodded, but her face told the truth. We were not going to be fast. Outside, another stone scraped, closer to the door. That decided it. I unzipped the tent. Cold air came in first, then the smell of ash and wet dirt. I swept the flashlight across the ground low and quick, the way I had promised myself I would. The old fire ring was almost gone. Only 2 stones remained in the original pit, sitting in a smear of black ash. The rest had been pulled into a ring around the tent. Not perfect. That made it worse. It looked handmade, adjusted, corrected 1 stone at a time. The circle was nearly closed except for one narrow opening near the side facing the trees. Not toward the trail, not toward the car, toward the darker part of the woods beyond the creek. Mason saw it over my shoulder. "Oh hell no," he whispered. We moved. I stepped out first and kept the beam on the ground. Claire followed, leaning hard on the hiking pole and on my shoulder. Mason crawled out after her with the bear spray in one hand and his phone in the other. Nobody looked into the trees, not directly. Looking felt like an invitation. We made it 3 steps before the scraping started again. From the old fire pit, a stone moved in the headlamp beam. I saw it. Not the hand, not the person, not the thing moving it, only the stone. It dragged itself across the dirt in a short, heavy pull, leaving a black line behind it. Then it stopped at the edge of the opening in the circle. Claire made a sound like she was going to be sick. Mason raised the bear spray toward the darkness, but I pushed his arm down. "Trail," I said, "now." The last thing we needed was to spray blind into the wind and blind ourselves. We went through the opening before it closed. Claire limped between us. Every step was too loud. Leaves cracked. Gear shifted inside the tent behind us. Or maybe that was another stone. I did not turn around to find out. When we reached the edge of the clearing, I made the mistake of looking back. The tent sat in the middle of the circle door hanging open. The stones were almost complete around it, and from inside the empty tent, something pressed against the fabric wall once. Low, slow, like it had realized we were no longer where it expected us to be. We did not run. That sounds strange because every part of me wanted to. But Claire could barely put weight on her left foot, and the trail back to the car was narrow enough in daylight. If we ran, she would fall. If she fell, Mason and I would have to stop. So we moved fast in the only way that made sense. Low beams, short steps, no talking unless we had to. Mason walked behind us with the bear spray ready, but pointed down. I kept one arm around Claire and held the flashlight with my other hand aimed at the ground instead of the trees. Roots crossed the trail like black ropes. Wet leaves hid loose rocks. The creek sounded louder than it had earlier, even though I knew the water had not changed. Everything behind us felt too quiet. Halfway down the trail, Claire stopped and bent forward, breathing through her teeth. "I need a second," she whispered. "You get 5, Mason said. He was not being cruel, he was scared. I turned the flashlight back toward the clearing. I could not see the tent from there. Only the trees between us and the site. No lights, no movement, no person following. That should have helped. It did not. The absence felt organized, like the woods had closed behind us to hide whatever was still happening up there. Claire straightened up before I told her to. We kept moving. At the creek crossing, Mason went first and held his hand out for Claire. She stepped wrong once and nearly went down, but he caught her. I heard something crack in the woods behind us at the same time. Not a branch falling, more like stone hitting stone. A dull, rounded clack. None of us looked back. By the time we reached the pullout, my shirt was stuck to my back and my hand had gone numb from gripping the flashlight. The car was exactly where we left it. That was the first normal thing that had happened in almost an hour. Mason unlocked it and we got Claire into the back seat. I climbed into the passenger side while Mason started the engine. He drove too fast for maybe the first 30 seconds. Then Claire said his name once, very quietly, and he slowed down. That was another thing that made the story feel less like a movie. Nobody yelled. Nobody gave a speech. We were too busy trying not to make a worse mistake. The forest road seemed longer going out. It always does after something bad happens. Every bend looked like the same bend. Every reflector on the roadside looked like eyes until the headlights reached it. When we finally got back to the paved road, Mason pulled over near a closed bait shop and just sat there with both hands still on the wheel. Claire started crying then, not loud, just quiet, angry crying like she hated herself for it. I checked my phone. 1 bar came and went. I walked a few steps away from the car and tried calling 911, but the call failed twice. When the signal came back, I called the county sheriff's non-emergency line instead. I told them someone had been moving things around our campsite while we were inside the tent. I said we had left because we believed someone was in the woods. I did not say the stone moved by itself. I did not say the audio disappeared from the video. I gave them the road name, the pullout, and the trail description Mason had saved on his map. They told us to stay in a public place if we felt unsafe and not return to the site alone. We drove to a gas station that stayed open all night and waited there until sunrise. A ranger called me around 9 the next morning. He said he and a deputy had found the site. Our tent was still there. The cooler was still there. Nothing had been stolen. The old fire ring had been put back together in front of the tent exactly where it would normally be. He said if we had not told him about the stones, he probably would not have noticed anything wrong. Then he asked if we had moved the tent during the night. I said no. He said there was a circular mark in the dirt around it. Not a trench, not a clear footprint. More like a flattened ring where heavy stones had rested long enough to press the leaves and soil down. He said the weird thing was that the ring was almost perfect. Almost. There was one gap, facing the tree line. I did not tell Claire that part until later. Mason and I went back with the ranger that afternoon because Claire's ankle was swollen and she refused to see the site again. I only wanted the wallet's phones and a few things we could not replace. I did not want the tent. I did not want the sleeping bags. Mason did not argue. In daylight, the campsite looked harmless again. That made me angry. The fire ring was back in place. The stones were dirty and black and ordinary. The tent sagged slightly in the middle where dew had settled on it. No signs of anyone hiding nearby, no threatening note, no footprints that proved anything. The ranger told us primitive sites like that were not supposed to have permanent fire rings. They cleared them out a few times a year because people kept building them. Then he said something that stayed with me. This one keeps coming back. He said it like an annoyance, like trash, like beer cans, like people ignoring leave no trace rules. Mason opened his pack and found his old phone in the side pocket. It was the one he had used to take the picture of the fire ring before we went into the tent. The battery was almost dead, but it turned on. We stood near the car later after leaving the site and looked at the photo again. The fire ring was normal. The tent was behind it. The one stone near the back corner was still there, barely visible in the dark. Mason zoomed in farther than he had the night before. That was when we saw the ground. Around the tent there was a faint circle in the dirt. Not stones, not yet. Just a darker pressed outline almost hidden under leaves and shadow. It went around the exact place where the tent stood. I tried to tell myself it was from older campers. Maybe another tent had been pitched there. Maybe someone had made a circle before and cleared it away. Maybe the soil remembered weight. But then Mason swiped to the first photo he had taken before we finished setting up. The tent was not there yet. Our gear was still in piles, and the faint circle was already on the ground, right where we later put the tent. Mason deleted the photos before I could stop him. I got mad at him for that, really mad. He just handed the phone back to me and said, "Good, now we don't have to look at it." I still think about that sometimes. Not the stones moving, not the gap facing the trees, not even the tent wall pressing outward after we left it. I think about that empty circle waiting in the dirt before we chose where to sleep. Because whatever was out there did not move the fire ring around our tent. It moved our tent into the place where the ring was always going to be. The man beside the gray tent never moved until we stopped looking. That was what Lisa said later, and I hated how accurate it was. He did not walk toward us. He did not wave. He did not call out from the dark. For most of that first hour, he only stood there at the far end of the campground loop near a tent with no light inside. It's still enough that we kept giving him normal explanations. We were in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan late October, on the last long stretch of a road trip that had gone on one day too many. Lisa and I had spent the week driving through Wisconsin and Michigan, stopping at state parks, small lake towns, and one overpriced motel that smelled like old carpet and pool chemicals. By that Saturday evening, all we wanted was a cheap place to sleep before heading home. The motel in the nearest town was full because of some fishing tournament. The next one was almost 40 miles away. We still had our camping gear in the back of the SUV from earlier in the trip, so when Lisa found a small campground near the lake on the map, it seemed practical, not adventurous, not romantic, just practical. That matters. We were not looking for isolation. We were tired. The campground had a self-pay station near the entrance, one wooden map board, and a gravel loop road that curved through pines and bare birch trees. Half the sites were already closed for the season with little yellow tags clipped to the posts. The restroom building was open on one side, but the showers were locked. A faded quiet hours sign leaned near the trash bins. There were 2 RVs parked near the front loop, both with porch lights on and folding chairs outside. Seeing those lights made Lisa relax. "Good," she said. "People." I felt the same way. We chose a site not far from the road, close enough to the restroom building that Lisa could see its light through the trees, and close enough to the SUV that we could sleep in the car if the temperature dropped too hard. I parked with the front facing out. Habit. Then we set up our small tent while there was still a little blue light left in the sky. Everything felt ordinary. cold but ordinary. I hammered the stakes into damp ground. Lisa put our sleeping bags inside. I set a lantern on the picnic table and checked the ranger number on the map board in case we needed it. There was weak service near the entrance 1 bar if I stood by the self-pay station, none near our site. Not ideal, but not strange for that area. While I was pulling the cooler from the back of the SUV, Lisa looked past me toward the far end of the loop. Is that guy with the gray tent? I turned. At the last campsite before the lake access trail, a gray tent stood under the trees. Beside it was a person. A man, I thought at first. Adult height, dark jacket, hood up or head down, too far away to see his face. He had no flashlight, no fire, no lantern. He just stood there beside the gray tent facing the loop road. I watched him for a few seconds, then looked away on purpose. Campgrounds are full of awkward little moments like that. People standing outside to smoke. People taking phone calls away from their family. People staring at nothing because they came to the woods to be left alone. Probably his sight, I said. Lisa did not answer right away. I carried the cooler to the picnic table. When I looked back again, the man was still there. Same posture, same direction, same distance. Lisa lowered her voice. I swear he was farther back before. I wanted to say she was wrong. Instead, I looked at the gray tent again and told myself that in a campground loop, distance can lie after dark. I said that because it was the easiest explanation. The loop curved, the trees were uneven, the light was fading. A person can look closer or farther away depending on where you stand, especially when you are tired and cold and trying not to admit you are already uncomfortable. Lisa accepted that answer, or pretended to. We had been married long enough for me to know the difference. We made dinner on the picnic table because neither of us wanted to start a real fire that late. Canned soup in a small pot, crackers from a box that had gone soft in the car, coffee from the thermos we had filled that morning at a gas station outside Marquette. The lantern sat between us, low and yellow, making our sight feel smaller than it was. Every few minutes, one of us looked toward the gray tent. Neither of us mentioned it at first. That was almost worse than talking about it. The silence around a thing can make it grow. I could feel Lisa checking without turning her head all the way. I did the same thing using the reflection in the SUV window when I could. The man was still there, or the person. I had started calling him a man only because my brain wanted a normal category. He stood beside the gray tent with his arms straight down, not stiff like a soldier, not relaxed either, just hanging. His hood or hair or whatever covered the shape of his head made it impossible to see whether he was looking at us or at the road between us. He could be smoking, I said finally. Lisa looked at me. I don't see smoke. Vaping then. With no light? Maybe he's just weird. That one almost worked. Campgrounds are full of weird people, quiet people, people who do not want to talk, people who stand by a lake after dark because they drove there to feel something and do not know what to do once they arrive. I had been one of those people more than once. I did not want to turn a stranger into a threat just because he was bad at being normal. But the sight around him bothered me. I noticed it piece by piece. There was no car at the gray tent. Not at the site, not along the loop, not tucked behind the trees. There were no camp chairs, no cooler, no bundle of firewood, no lantern hanging inside the tent, no little pile of shoes by the door. The picnic table at that site looked empty. Even from where we sat, I could tell there was nothing on it. Maybe his car is an overflow, I said. Lisa did not ask where the overflow lot was. There was not one on the map. I stood up and walked to the SUV mostly, so I could look without making it obvious. We kept a small pair of binoculars in the glove box for birding something Lisa had bought for the trip and used twice. I took them out and leaned against the open passenger door, pretending to search for my jacket. Through the thick binoculars, the gray tent came into focus first. It looked too clean. That was the only way I could describe it. No sag from moisture, no wrinkles from packing. The rainfly sat smooth and tight, but I could not see any guy lines. No stakes either, though the ground around it was flat enough that I should have. Then I moved the lenses to the person. The image shook because my hands were colder than I realized. Dark jacket, dark pants, head angled slightly down, face hidden completely either by shadow or distance. He was standing near the picnic table now. I lowered the binoculars. My stomach tightened. Lisa noticed. "What?" "He moved," I said. She looked toward the end of the loop. The person was no longer beside the gray tent. He stood one sight closer near the next picnic table. Still no flashlight, still no fire, still facing our direction. Lisa pushed her soup away. I checked my phone. No service at the site. I told her I was going to walk to the map board and try the ranger number from there. I did not say it like an emergency. I said it like I wanted to ask if there was a camp host around. That felt reasonable. That felt like the kind of thing a normal person would do before panicking. At the self-pay station, I got 1 bar for maybe 5 seconds. The call did not go through. I was about to try again when I looked at the campground map under the cloudy plastic cover. The far loop was marked with little handwritten X's over several sites. Seasonal closures, probably. Soft ground near the lake, maybe. The last site, the one with the gray tent, had a yellow tag drawn beside it. Closed. I turned back toward our campsite. Lisa was standing by the SUV now, not at the picnic table. The man was still at the next site over from the gray tent. And the gray tent behind him looked perfectly clear in the dark, like it was catching light from somewhere that did not exist. I tried the Ranger number 3 more times. Each time the call failed before it even rang. 1 bar would appear, then vanish as soon as I pressed call, like the phone was only pretending to have service. I stood beside the self-pay station, with one arm raised, turning slightly, like that would make a difference. It did not. That was when I saw Lisa leave the picnic table and move closer to the SUV. She was not running. She was not waving me over. She was doing the same thing I would have done if I had been alone, acting normal while quietly making a better choice. The lantern was still on the table. The soup pot was still there. But her sleeping bag was in her arms, and she had my jacket folded over it. I walked back fast, but not too fast. I did not want to look scared in front of whatever was down the loop. That sounds ridiculous now. At the time, it felt important. If the figure was just a strange camper, I did not want to escalate things by acting like he was a threat. If he was not just a strange camper, I did not want to show panic from 50 yards away. Lisa met me at the rear of the SUV. "The site is closed," I said quietly. "I know." I looked at her. She nodded toward the map board. Yellow tag on the post too. I saw it when we drove in. I thought it was for the site next to it. Neither of us said the obvious thing. If the site was closed, the tent should not have been there. If the tent had been set up illegally, there should have been a car or some gear. If the person belonged to the tent, he should have had some reason to stand outside it in the cold without a light. None of those pieces fit. I made a decision then. Not the dramatic one. Not leave everything and peel out of the campground. Not yet. But the next safest step. "We sleep in the car," I said. Lisa nodded so quickly, I knew she had already decided the same thing. We started moving the important things first. Wallets, phones, keys, sleeping bags, my jacket, her medication pouch, a flashlight. The rest could stay. The tent was cheap. The cooler could sit outside for 10 minutes while we figured out whether we were leaving or just waiting near the entrance until morning. The whole time I kept checking the far loop. The figure was still by the picnic table, one sight closer than the gray tent. Then while I was folding the second sleeping bag, he was gone. Just gone. The site was empty. The gray tent still stood behind it, too visible in the dark, but the figure was no longer beside the table. I stared hard enough for my eyes to water. Nothing moved. No flashlight beam. No sound of footsteps on gravel. No car door. No tent zipper. For maybe 10 seconds, I felt relief. Then Lisa whispered my name. She was looking toward the restroom building. It was closer to us than the gray tent, maybe 60 feet away across the loop and slightly downhill. One exterior light buzzed above the door, weak and yellow, barely strong enough to reach the trash cans. At the edge of that light, where the building shadow met the trees, the figure stood again. Same posture. Arms down, head slightly lowered, facing us. I had not seen him walk there. Neither had Lisa. There was open gravel between the far site and the restroom. If he had crossed it, we would have heard something. Gravel always talks under shoes. Even careful shoes. I said, "Get in the car." Lisa did not argue. She climbed into the passenger seat and locked her door. I put the sleeping bags in the back seat and shut the hatch as gently as I could. Then I got into the driver's seat and turned the key far enough to bring the dashboard on without starting the engine. I did not want headlights yet. I wanted to think for 5 seconds without announcing every movement we made. Lisa looked at the figure through the windshield. "Are we leaving?" "Yes," I said, but my voice sounded less certain than the word. The keys were in my hand. The SUV had gas. The road out was right there, but our tent was still open and my duffel was still inside with the envelope of cash, my spare glasses, and the prescription bottle I had stupidly moved there while unpacking. I could leave all of it. I should have. But the medication was not something I wanted to abandon overnight in a damp tent if we ended up just driving to the entrance and reporting it at daylight. I was thinking in practical problems. That is what fear does when it is not ready to admit it has become fear. Then Lisa grabbed my wrist. The figure by the restroom had shifted. Not closer, not exactly. His head had tilted, just a few degrees, as if he had noticed we were watching from inside the car. I reached forward and flicked on the headlights. The restroom building flooded white. The trash cans, the door, the buzzing light, the dark strip beside the wall. No one. Lisa sucked in a breath. I turned the headlights off. The figure was there again, same place, but now his head was tilted the other way. I left the headlights off after that. The dashboard glow was enough to see Lisa's face, and I did not want to keep testing the figure like it was some trick of light. The test had already told us what we needed to know. In headlights, nothing. In darkness there, Lisa whispered, "Drive." I almost did. My hand was already on the gear shift when I remembered the keys in my hand were not the problem. The prescription bottle was. It was in the side pocket of my duffel inside the tent, maybe 8 feet from the driver's door. I had moved it there earlier because I did not want it freezing in the car overnight. Stupid normal thinking. The kind of decision that only becomes important after everything has already gone wrong. Lisa saw my face change. "What?" "My meds are in the tent. Leave them. I can't go 2 days without them. We can find a pharmacy, not at midnight in the Upper Peninsula." I hated myself for saying it because it sounded like an excuse to do the thing people yell at horror characters for doing. But it was not curiosity. It was not pride. It was not wanting to prove anything. The tent was beside the SUV. The figure was by the restroom. Lisa was locked in the car with her phone camera open and her hand on the horn. If I was going to get the bottle, this was the least dangerous version of doing it. I told her the exact plan. I would open my door. I would go straight to the tent. I would unzip only the side pocket of the duffel. I would not look toward the restroom. I would come straight back. If the figure moved, she would hit the horn and I would drop everything. Lisa did not like it. Neither did I. But she nodded once. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold. The campground sounded too empty. No RV doors, no lake water, no wind in the trees. Just the soft click of the SUV door staying open behind me and Lisa breathing through the cracked window. I kept my flashlight pointed at the ground. The tent was close enough that I could have touched it with 3 long steps, but I moved carefully because the last thing I needed was to trip over a stake in the dark. The lantern on the picnic table still burned low. Its yellow circle ended before it reached the restroom building. I could feel the figure beyond that edge without looking. The duffel was just inside the tent door. I crouched, unzipped the side pocket, and found the prescription bottle by touch. I put it in my jacket pocket. I should have gone back right then. Then I saw the envelope on the picnic table. It was not ours. I knew that before I picked it up, because our self-pay envelope was blue and folded inside the windshield receipt clip. This one was gray with water stains along the edges, the kind of paper that had been wet once and dried stiff. It lay beside the lantern, half under the soup spoon Lisa had used earlier. I did not walk around the table. I reached for it with 2 fingers, keeping 1 foot angled toward the SUV. The front had pencil writing on it. "Site closed, do not assign." Under that, in smaller letters, someone had written, "Gray tent still there." My first thought was not fear, it was anger. Real sharp anger. Because if someone knew that tent was still there, if someone had written that down, then why was the site still open? Why was the map board cloudy and useless? Why was there no host at the booth? Then the horn chirped once. Not a full blast. 1 quick warning from Lisa. I dropped the envelope, grabbed the prescription bottle in my pocket, and turned. The figure was no longer by the restroom. It stood at the site across from ours, maybe 30 feet away, close enough that the lantern light reached the lower half of its body, but not the face. Dark pants, dark jacket, arms down, head low. It was not walking. It was already there. I backed toward the SUV. Lisa had her phone pressed against the glass recording. Her other hand was on the horn. I did not run until I reached the open driver's door because I did not want to fall. Then I got in, slammed it shut, and locked every door twice. The figure did not move. It did not need to. I started the engine. The headlights came on automatically this time, washing over the opposite site. The figure vanished. The site was empty. Lisa said, "Go." I did. I threw the SUV into drive and pulled out so fast gravel snapped against the underside. I did not look back until we reached the curve near the far loop. That was when the road forced the headlights across the gray tent site. The tent was still there, but it looked wrong from that angle. It had no visible stakes, no guy lines, no sag, no gear around it. It sat on a pale rectangle of dry grass, perfectly flat, as if it had been placed there for display and never used by anyone. Lisa lifted her phone and took one picture through the side window as we passed. I told her not to, but she had already done it. The flash did not go off, thank God. We drove past the closed site, past the restroom building, past the self-pay station. I was almost at the campground exit when Lisa made a sound I had never heard from her before. Small, broken. I looked at her, then at the rearview mirror. The figure was not behind the gray tent anymore. It was standing at the edge of the road behind us, centered in the mirror, not chasing, not waving, just standing where the light from our taillights ended. We did not stop at the first gas station. I saw the sign for it through the trees, a small blue rectangle with an arrow and a distance, but I kept driving. Lisa did not ask why. I think she understood that stopping while the campground was still close would not feel like stopping at all. It would feel like giving whatever was behind us a chance to catch up. We drove until the lake road turned into a 2-lane highway, and the trees opened just enough to show a strip of pale sky in the east. Only then did I pull into a ranger station parking lot. The building was closed. Of course it was. It was still too early, but there was a light over the door and a posted emergency number and enough service for my phone to show 2 bars. I called. I told the dispatcher there was a man in the campground who may have been trespassing at a closed site. I told her he had been moving closer to us in the dark. I told her there was a gray tent at a site marked closed and that we had found an old self-pay envelope on our picnic table warning not to assign that site. I did not say the man disappeared in headlights. I did not say he stood where the taillight ended. I did not say the tent looked like it had no stakes. You learn very quickly which parts of a story sound useful. The dispatcher took our names and the campground location. She asked if we were safe. I said yes. She asked if we needed medical help. I said no. Lisa was sitting beside me, holding her phone with both hands, staring at the photo she had taken through the side window. I asked to see it. She handed me the phone without speaking. The picture was blurry because we had been moving. The side window reflected part of Lisa's face and the dashboard lights. Beyond that, the gray tent sat at the closed site, pale and clean under the trees. The figure was not beside it, not where I expected it to be, not even near the road behind us. At first I felt relief. Then Lisa pointed to the right edge of the frame. The figure was there, half cut off by the window frame, standing at the edge of the loop road, behind our SUV. It had not been beside the tent when she took the picture. It had been behind us already, but it was not looking at the car. Its head was turned toward our campsite, toward our tent. We waited in the ranger station parking lot until a truck pulled in just after 7. A ranger got out with a coffee in one hand and a ring of keys in the other. He looked annoyed at first, the way people look when they expect a tourist problem before breakfast. Then he saw Lisa's face and changed. He listened. He did not laugh. That helped. When I showed him the photo, he asked if he could take a picture of the screen. Then he went inside, made a few calls, and told us not to return to the campground. He said someone would go check the loop and collect our gear if it was safe. He also said the far site had been closed since early September because the ground near the lake access trail was soft. Not dangerous enough for a big public notice, just unstable. No tents were supposed to be there. "What about a gray tent?" Lisa asked. The ranger looked at the photo again. Then he said, "We'll check." He called me that afternoon. I was sitting in a diner by then, trying to eat eggs I did not want. Lisa had not slept. She had the hood of her sweatshirt pulled up and both hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold. The ranger said they found our site. Our tent was still there. Cooler still there. Lanterns still on the picnic table, dead now. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged. Then he said the closed site was empty. No gray tent, no person, no envelope, no footprints around the picnic table. But there was a pale rectangle in the grass where something had been exactly the size of a small tent. The grass inside that rectangle was dry and flat, even though the ground around it was wet with morning dew. No stake holes, no drag marks, no tire tracks. I asked if that could happen from a tent being there overnight. He did not answer right away. Then he said, "Not without stakes." We did not go back for our gear. I told him to throw it away. Lisa agreed immediately. The ranger said he could dispose of food and loose items, but the tent and a few personal things had to be logged first. A week later, a box arrived at our house. I had not expected that. Inside were our lantern, the binoculars, Lisa's extra gloves, and the tent bag. The tent had been folded. That bothered me before I touched anything else. We had left it standing, door open, stakes in, sleeping bags half pulled out. I know that, Lisa knows that, but the tent in the bag was folded tighter than I had ever managed to fold it. Poles in one sleeve, rainfly wrapped around the body, stakes bundled with a rubber band. There was an envelope tucked under the strap, a gray self-pay envelope, dry, flat, no water stains. I told Lisa not to touch it. She backed away from the kitchen table. I opened it with a butter knife because I did not want my fingers on the paper. The front was blank. No site number, no ranger stamp, no fee amount. Inside, written in pencil, was one line. "He stands where the light ends." I burned it in the driveway. That should have felt final. It did not. The paper curled black at the edges and most of the sentence disappeared in seconds. But one corner did not burn right away. It lifted in the heat, small and stubborn, long enough for me to see a tiny number written there. Our site number. Not the closed site, ours. I have not camped since. Lisa still likes road trips, but we stay in hotels now, even bad ones. I do not complain about old carpet or vending machines, or people arguing in the hallway. Walls are walls, doors lock, lights reach corners. But sometimes when I pull into a parking lot late at night, and the headlights cut across the spaces ahead, I look beyond the last bright patch. Not because I want to, because some part of me still expects to see him there, standing at the edge of the light, waiting to see which place we choose next. The recorder picked up someone breathing beside my tent while I was asleep. I did not hear it that night. That is what still bothers me. I slept through the part that should have woken me up. I used to record rain sounds for a small channel online, nothing serious. Just long videos for people who liked sleeping with forest noise in the background, rain on tarp, creek water, wind in pine trees, that kind of thing. I had done it enough to know what normal nighttime audio sounded like. Deer stepping through leaves, raccoons near a cooler, a branch falling after it gets heavy with rain. The woods are never really silent, but they do have rules. That campsite was in western North Carolina, off a short forest road I had used once before during the day. It was not deep wilderness. My SUV was parked maybe 30 yards from the tent. There was an old fire ring, a flat patch of ground, and a creek somewhere downhill. I had a headlamp bear spray, a full power bank, and enough gas to leave if the weather turned. The forecast said light rain after midnight, perfect recording weather. I kept the setup simple. Tent under the trees, small tarp over the front, recorder on a mini tripod about 12 feet from the door, pointed toward the tree line so it could catch the rain and the creek together. I put a foam windscreen over the microphone and checked the battery twice. 8 hours of record time, more than enough. Before starting the main file, I ran a 30-second test. That was normal. I always checked levels before leaving the recorder outside all night. I stood behind the tripod, counted quietly to 5, then walked back to the tent and listened through headphones. The rain had not started yet, so the file should have been mostly insects and distant water. At 12 seconds, the waveform jumped, just once, a short, soft spike. I replayed it. It sounded like breath. Not wind across the foam, not my jacket brushing the mic. A real breath close enough that the microphone caught the wet edge of it. I looked toward the tree line. Nothing moved. I played the test again and told myself I was being stupid. I had probably exhaled without realizing it. The mic was sensitive. Sound can bounce in weird ways under trees. I deleted the test file, reset the levels, and started the real recording at 10:16 p.m. The little red light began blinking on the recorder. Steady, normal. I zipped my jacket and crouched to make sure the tripod was stable. Then I turned back toward the tent. Halfway there, the red light disappeared, only for a second, like something had passed between me and the recorder. When I looked back, it was blinking again. Steady, normal. I did not ignore the light. I want that part understood. I walked back to the recorder with my headlamp on and checked the tripod from all sides. The red light blinked steadily. The screen showed the file was still recording. The battery icon was full. The foam windscreen was dry except for a little mist. Nothing was touching it, nothing was hanging over it. The nearest branch was at least 6 feet away. I swept the headlamp across the clearing. Tent, fire ring, cooler locked in the back of the SUV. Tarp line, dark trees beyond the recorder. No eye shine, no movement, no person standing just outside the light. I checked the ground around the tripod too, because that was the only useful thing to check. The dirt was damp, but not muddy yet. My own boot prints were visible near the tent. Around the recorder, I saw nothing clear. That gave me enough reason not to leave. Not because I felt brave, because there was no confirmed danger. A recorder light blinking out for a second could be my body crossing the angle. The breath in the test file could be bad monitoring or whine through the foam. Leaving over that would have felt absurd, especially with the SUV close and the weather still calm. So I did what I would normally do. I made the campsite smaller. I moved the bear spray inside the tent. I put my keys in the pocket of my jacket, not in my pack. I kept my headlamp beside the sleeping bag. Then I crawled in and zipped the door closed from the inside. The rain started a little after midnight, soft at first, then steady. It hit the tarp in a low, even pattern and made the whole tent feel sealed off from the trees. I checked the recorder app on my phone twice. The Bluetooth signal kept dropping, but that was normal through wet fabric and distance. Each time it reconnected, the timer was still moving. Around 1:13 a.m., I woke up. I did not wake up scared. I woke up confused with that heavy feeling you get when a sound has already stopped before your brain identifies it. I lay there in the dark listening to rain and my own breathing. Then I thought of the tent zipper. I reached toward the door. The zipper pull was exactly where it should have been, all the way down, closed from the inside. I touched it with 2 fingers to be sure. Cold metal. Still. For a minute I listened. No footsteps, no whispering, no hands on the tent, just rain running off the fly sheet and dripping near the front stake. I told myself the sound had been nylon tightening in the cold, or the tarp shifting underwater, or a dream pulling a normal noise into the wrong shape. I did not open the tent. I did not call out. I did not go outside to check the recorder in the rain. I stayed where I was because at that moment, the safest thing was still the tent. I fell back asleep sometime after that. When I woke up, the rain had weakened to a mist. The recorder was still standing outside, red light blinking. The file had run all night. That should have made me feel better. It did for about 5 minutes. Then I put on my headphones and checked the section around 1:13. The zipper sound was there, clear, slow, much clearer than anything I had heard while awake. It was followed by breathing near the microphone. Then exactly 12 seconds of silence. No rain, no insects, no creak, nothing, as if the whole forest had been muted. I listened to that 12-second gap 3 times before I let myself move. The first time I thought the headphones had cut out. The second time I checked the volume. The third time I watched the waveform while it played. It was not a flat glitch. It was not the file stopping. The recording kept going. The counter moved forward. There was just no sound in it. That made no sense. The rain had been steady at 1:13. I remembered that clearly because it was the sound that helped me fall back asleep. The creek should have been in the background. The insects should have been there even faintly. But for those 12 seconds, there was nothing. No rain, no creek, no air. Then the audio came back with one soft breath near the mic. I took the headphones off. The campsite looked normal in the gray morning. Wet tarp, dark trees, my tent sagging a little from moisture. The recorder still on the tripod exactly where I had left it. That normalness bothered me. I wanted something obvious. A footprint, a broken clip, a torn wire. Anything that would make the file easier to understand. I checked the recorder first. Battery was fine. Storage was fine. No error message. The main file was still intact. The tripod had not fallen. The windscreen was wet from rain but not damaged. I turned the recorder over in my hands looking for mud or scratches. That was when I saw the smear. It was on the lower right side of the case near the battery door. A small brown mark no wider than my thumb. Not fresh mud, dry mud. That was the part I could not explain. Everything else outside was damp. The ground was wet. My boots were wet. The tripod legs had beads of water on them, but the mud on the recorder was dry enough to flake when I touched it. It was on the side facing my tent. I looked down at the ground around the tripod. No boot prints, no animal tracks, nothing clear. But near one leg, there were 3 thin marks in the damp dirt. Short lines close together like fingertips had dragged through the soil and stopped. I stood there longer than I should have, holding the recorder in both hands. Then I heard myself say no, not loud, just enough to make the clearing feel less empty. I put the headphones back on because I needed to know the rest before I decided what to do. That sounds careless, but I was standing beside my tent in daylight with my car visible through the trees. I was not walking into the woods. I was not following a sound. I was checking evidence before leaving. After the 12 seconds of silence, the rain returned all at once. Then came a small sound right against the microphone. Not speech at first, more like lips parting, a wet little mouth sound that made my shoulders tighten. Then a voice, low, almost under the rain. He didn't wake up. I stopped the file so fast my thumb slipped off the button. For a few seconds I could not make myself breathe normally. The words were not loud, they were not dramatic. That made them worse. It sounded close, calm, and disappointed. I turned toward the tent. The zipper was still closed, all the way down, from the inside. I knew I had checked it during the night. I knew I had touched the pull with my fingers, but near the bottom seam just beside the door, there was a long, damp mark on the fabric. Not rain. The rain had run downward in thin lines. This mark went sideways, from the inside edge of the zipper toward the outside flap, like something wet had dragged across it while the door stayed closed. I stopped listening after that. That was the first smart thing I did all morning. A part of me wanted to rewind the line and make sure I had heard it correctly. Another part wanted to play the next few minutes because maybe there was an explanation right after it. A person laughing, a branch scraping, some obvious sound that would turn the voice into a trick of rain and compression. But I was still at the campsite. That mattered more than being sure. I took the headphones off and put the recorder in my jacket pocket. My hands felt too clumsy for careful packing, so I only took what I needed. Phone, keys, wallet, power bank, bear spray, the memory cards from my camera case. I left the tarp tied between the trees. I left the folding chair. I left the small stove on the picnic rock. None of it was worth standing there with my back to the woods. The tent was still zipped when I pulled the stakes. That felt wrong too. I wanted to leave it standing and go, but I knew if I did that, I would keep thinking about it later. So I did the fastest version of packing. Poles out, fabric rolled wet, no folding, no checking pockets. I shoved the whole thing into the back of the SUV and closed the hatch. The recorder clicked in my pocket. Not a button click. Playback. I froze beside the driver's door. At first I thought I had bumped it somehow. Then I heard wet leaves under footsteps. Slow footsteps. Close. The tiny speaker on the recorder was not loud, but the sound was clear enough. One step, then another. Leaves pressing down, water squeezing out from under the weight. I pulled the recorder from my pocket. The screen was lit. The file was playing by itself. The footsteps continued. I looked toward the tree line. Nothing moved there. Then I realized what made the sound feel wrong. The steps in the recording matched mine. Not exactly. A little behind, half a beat late. When I shifted my boot in the wet dirt, the recorder played the same kind of shift a moment later. When I took one careful step toward the driver's door, the speaker gave me one careful step back. Like the file was following me from a few seconds behind. I did not stop to test it. I did not walk in a circle. I did not say anything into the mic. I pressed stop, got into the SUV, locked the doors, and started the engine. The recorder sat on the passenger seat screen, dark again. I kept expecting it to light back up. It did not. The road out was only 1.5 miles, but I drove it with both hands tight on the wheel and the bear spray rolling on the floor under the passenger seat. I did not turn on music. I did not call anyone because there was no signal yet. I just followed the wet gravel through the trees and watched for the bend that meant the trailhead was close. When I reached the trailhead parking area, my phone came alive. 3 messages came in from overnight. 1 weather alert, 1 spam email, 1 notification from the recorder app. Recording started 11:47 p.m. I sat there staring at it. That was wrong. I had started the main recording at 10:16. I remembered because I always wrote the start time in my notes. I had even checked the recorder display before going into the tent. 10:16 p.m., not 11:47. I opened the app. The file was there, 8 hours and 9 minutes long. The waveform showed the full night. Rain, insects, creek, the 12-second silence, everything. But the app listed the start time as 11:47 p.m. I checked the recorder itself. Same thing, 11:47 p.m. That was when I stopped pretending this was only audio. I put the SUV in drive and left the trailhead. I did not go back for the tarp. I did not go back for the chair. I did not even slow down when I passed the turnoff to the campsite road. Whatever had been recorded out there could wait until I was somewhere with walls. I drove straight to Nate's apartment instead of going home. Nate was the only person I knew who would understand the file before he judged the story. He did freelance audio work for podcasts and small documentaries, and he had saved more than one of my recordings when wind noise or bad gain ruined a track. I did not tell him everything at first. I said I had a file with weird metadata and maybe a voice buried under rain. He made coffee while I sat at his kitchen table with the recorder between my hands. That was the first time I felt embarrassed. Not scared, embarrassed. Morning light was coming through his blinds. Traffic was moving outside. Somebody in the apartment upstairs was vacuuming. All the normal sounds made the night feel impossible, like I had brought something stupid into a room that did not have space for it. Nate copied the file to his laptop and opened it in editing software. He did not joke once after he saw the waveform. The 12-second gap looked wrong even on the screen. Not silent the way a quiet room is silent. Clean. Cut out. But the file itself had no edit markers, no dropouts, no visible corruption. He checked the metadata next. Then he looked at me. "What time did you start recording?" 10:16, I said. "You sure?" I wrote it down. He turned the laptop toward me. The file creation time showed 9:58 p.m. The app log showed 11:47 p.m. The recorder file name showed 10:16 p.m. 3 times. Same file. Nate leaned back and said nothing for a while. I asked if that could happen from a bad clock or corrupted firmware. He said yes, technically. Then he added that it should not happen in 3 different ways on one continuous file. He isolated the voice section while I stood near the window pretending not to watch. I did not want to hear it again. But when he played the clean track, the words were clearer than they had been in the woods. He didn't wake up. Nate stopped playback. I told him there was more after that. I had not listened to it yet. He looked at me like he wanted to ask why, then understood. He played the next few seconds. Under the rain, under what sounded like breath, there was another whisper. Much smaller. Not this time. Neither of us spoke after that. I called the ranger station that afternoon. I reported possible trespassing near the primitive site. I said my recorder had captured a voice outside my tent while I was asleep. I did not mention metadata. I did not mention the file playing my footsteps back to me. The woman on the phone took my name and the road number. She said they would send someone through the area when they could. 2 days later, a ranger called back. He said they found no signs of anyone camping nearby. No trash, no fresh fire, no vehicle tracks beyond mine. He did say they found one piece of equipment at the site. A tripod leg? I told him that was impossible. I had packed the tripod with the recorder. Then I checked my gear bag. The tripod was there, all 3 legs attached. I stopped uploading rain videos after that. I sold most of my audio gear except the recorder. I do not know why I kept it. Maybe because throwing it away felt like admitting it belonged to someone else. I put it in a drawer in my desk with the battery removed and the memory card formatted. A week later, I opened the drawer to put old cables away. The recorder screen was on, no battery inside, no cable plugged in. On the memory card, there was one file. rain_test_001, 12 seconds long. I had formatted that card. I know I had. I played the file once through the tiny built-in speaker standing in the middle of my office with the afternoon sun on the carpet. For 11 seconds, there was nothing. No rain, no room tone, no static. At the very end, there was a zipper opening. Close, slow, like someone letting themselves in. I deleted the file. Then I took the recorder to an electronics recycling bin behind a grocery store and dropped it in without looking back. That should have ended it. It did not. I do not record rain anymore. I do not sleep well when it storms. And sometimes late at night, when rain taps against my bedroom window, my phone lights up by itself and shows the Bluetooth screen. One nearby device. No name, no icon. Just one word under it. Recording. The campground map only went to 11. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. Not because I was looking for something wrong, but because the envelope in my hand said Site 12. I had been driving for almost 7 hours by then. I was coming up through Washington after visiting my sister in Oregon, and I had made the kind of mistake people make when they think they can push one more hour. The motel I planned to use was full. The next one was farther north than I wanted to drive in the dark. My eyes were tired enough that the road signs had started to feel too bright. The campground showed as open on the app, late season self-check-in, basic sites, no showers, no reservations required. That was all I needed. I had a sleeping bag in the back of the SUV, a flashlight, bear spray, a power bank, and enough gas to leave first thing in the morning. I was not looking for a camping trip. I was looking for a legal place to sleep. The entrance was easy to miss. A narrow gravel road off the highway marked by a brown sign with white letters and a reflector that caught my headlights at the last second. The self-pay kiosk sat about 50 yards in under a small roof of old shingles. There was a map board beside it, a quiet hour's notice, and a metal slot for envelopes. No gate, no closed sign, no host truck parked nearby. That made it feel official enough. I parked in front of the kiosk and left the engine running while I checked the board. The plastic cover over the map was cloudy and scratched, but I could still read the loop. Sites 1 through 11, a restroom building near the middle, a short trail to some overlook or creek. The far end of the loop faded under old marker stains, but there was no Site 12. Then I opened the envelope box. Most of the envelopes were blank. One was already filled out, N. Cole Site 12. I stood there with the flashlight under my chin, staring at my name written in pencil. Not Nathan, just my initial and last name, the way the app displayed it. That was the first explanation I reached for because it was the easiest one. Maybe the campground app had synced. Maybe a host had checked late arrivals earlier and left it ready. Maybe Site 12 was an overflow site that had not been added to the old map. I did not like it, but I did not leave. That matters. I want that part clear. I was tired, but I was not careless. I checked the fee box, I checked the posted notices, I checked my phone. One bar near the kiosk. Enough to load nothing useful, but enough to make the place feel less cut off. I took a photo of the map before driving in just in case. Then I looked at the envelope again. There was a smaller line in the bottom corner, almost hidden under the fold. Face the road, not the trees. I read it twice. At the time, I thought it meant parking direction. Some campgrounds care about that. Head in only, back in only. Keep headlights away from other sites. It sounded like one of those instructions somebody writes because people keep doing the same thing wrong. So I put $10 in the envelope, tore off the receipt stub, and slid the rest into the metal slot. The slot made a hollow sound when the envelope dropped. Too hollow, like there was nothing else inside. I drove into the loop slowly, with the map photo open on my phone and the receipt stub tucked into the cup holder. The road was gravel at first, then packed dirt where the trees closed in. My headlights picked up the site posts one by one, 1, 2, 3. All of them looked normal. Short wooden posts, white numbers, gravel pads, picnic tables dark with moisture. Most of the sites were empty. A few had leaves gathered where tires would have been during summer. Site 6 had a rusted fire ring and a broken camp chair folded against the bear box. Site 9 had a tarp strap hanging from one tree moving a little in the wind. Nothing looked occupied. Nothing looked abandoned either. Just late season quiet, the kind that makes a place feel like it is already done with people. The restroom building came up on my right, exactly where the map said it should be. One side was locked. The other had a dim exterior light that buzzed over the door. I almost stopped there and slept near the building instead. That would have been the smarter choice if I had known what was coming. But at that point, the only strange thing was an envelope and an old map. I still had a paid site to find, and the loop road kept going. Past the restroom, the road narrowed. My phone showed the pin a little farther ahead, though the mapboard photo ended at site 11. I passed 10, then 11, then a stretch of road that looked like maintenance access. No sign said closed. No chain blocked it. The gravel thinned under the tires and branches brushed the passenger side once with a dry scrape that made me flinch. Then my headlights hit a post. 12. It stood at the far end of a small gravel pad leaning slightly toward the road. The number was painted white and looked newer than the wood around it. Behind the post, the tree line pressed close, too close for a standard campsite. There was a picnic table, an old fire ring, and a rusted bear box near the back edge of the clearing. A short wooden hook jutted from a second post beside the table, the kind people use for hanging lanterns. I parked with the front of the SUV facing the road the way the envelope had told me to. That made me feel better for a few seconds. Instructions followed, door clear, engine pointed out. If something changed, I could leave without backing up. I did not set up the tent. I was too tired and sleeping in the SUV felt safer anyway. I folded the rear seats down, spread my sleeping bag in back, and kept the bear spray on the passenger seat. I put my keys in the cup holder and left my shoes on. Practical things, small decisions that make you feel in control. Before settling in, I stepped out to take one photo of the site. I do that when I arrive late. It helps me remember where I parked, and it gives me a record if anything happens to the car or the gear. I stood near the driver's door and took a picture of the post marked 12 with the picnic table behind it. The flash did not go off. The image looked normal at first. Post 12, picnic table, tree line, a little glare from my headlamp near the corner. Then I looked up from the phone. The post was not beside the picnic table anymore. It was closer to the road, only by a few feet. Not impossible if I had moved without realizing it. Not enough to make me panic, but enough that I looked back at the photo and then at the real post again, trying to match the angle. In the photo, the post stood almost touching the picnic table. In front of me, it stood near the edge of the gravel pad. I told myself it was lens distortion, low light, exhaustion, the kind of thing phone cameras do when they try to sharpen darkness. I took another photo. This time, the post appeared near the road where I was seeing it. That should have ended the thought. But in the first photo behind the post hanging from the old wooden hook, there was a yellow lantern. I looked at the hook. It was empty. I did not touch the hook. I did not walk closer to the tree line. That is another detail I want clear. By then I was uncomfortable, but not convinced I was in danger. A photo showing a lantern that was not there could still be a phone artifact, a reflection, a flare from the headlamp. Something caught in the software when it tried to brighten the dark. So I did what made sense. I got in the SUV and locked the doors. Sleeping in the car had been my plan anyway. I folded my jacket under my head, left the driver's seat clear, and kept the keys in the cup holder where I could reach them without sitting up. My phone was plugged into the power bank. The bear spray was on the passenger seat. I did not use the lantern hook. I did not hang anything outside. I turned off the headlamp and let the interior settle into the dim glow from the dashboard clock. For a while, nothing happened. The site was quiet in a way that still felt normal. A branch tapped somewhere behind the bear box. The SUV ticked as the engine cooled. Once something small moved through the leaves near the fire ring, probably a mouse or a chipmunk. I listened to it and felt almost grateful. Normal animals make a place feel less empty. I must have fallen asleep because when I opened my eyes again, the clock read 12:43 a.m. There was yellow light in the trees. Not headlights, not moonlight, not the restroom light from down the loop. It was smaller than that, warmer. A soft lantern glow hanging between two trunks behind the picnic table about chest height. It did not swing, it did not flicker. It just stayed there, pointed toward the road. I sat up slowly. The first thing I did was check the hook. Empty. The second thing I did was check the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty except for my sleeping bag and jacket. No shape, no person, no face in the glass. I told myself the light could be another camper deeper in the woods. Maybe there was a trail I had not noticed. Maybe Site 12 was not the last site after all. Maybe someone had walked in quietly and hung a lantern where I could not see the cord. None of that made me want to step outside. I started the SUV. The headlights cut across the picnic table, the bear box, the post marked 12, and the tree line behind them. The yellow light vanished the second the headlights touched the trees. That should have made me feel better. It did not. I decided to move back to the entrance and sleep near the kiosk. That was the safest choice I could make without overreacting completely. The entrance had weak signal, the restroom light, and the map board. If something felt wrong there too, I would leave the campground. I put the SUV in drive and followed the loop road, slowly keeping the headlights low because the fog had thickened near the ground. I passed the restroom building after what felt like 1 minute. Then Site 10. Then Site 11. That made sense. I had entered from the other direction, so I expected the kiosk next. Instead, the road curved left. My headlights landed on a wooden post. 12. I stopped with one foot on the brake. For a few seconds, I genuinely believed I had taken a wrong turn. There had to be a split in the loop that I missed. A service road, a spur, some stupid campground layout that made sense in daylight and not at night. I checked my phone. The offline map showed my blue dot near the entrance, but it spun slowly, unsure which way I was facing. I drove again. This time I paid attention to every marker. Restroom building on the right, Site 10, Site 11, a curve, then the same post. 12. I checked the trip odometer, 0.7 miles. The whole campground loop on the map board had looked shorter than that, maybe a quarter mile at most. I had driven almost 3 times that and ended up where I started. My rational explanations were getting smaller. I pulled up the photo I had taken of the map board at the kiosk. I zoomed in. Sites 1 through 11, restroom, entrance, no spur road after 11, no Site 12, no second loop. The road should have carried me out. I looked through the windshield. The postmarked 12 stood in front of the SUV, leaning slightly toward the road. Under the white number, something had been carved into the wood. Not the line from the envelope, a different one, fresh enough that the cuts looked pale in the headlights. Don't face it toward the road. I did not get out to read it closer. I did not touch the post. I did not try to scrape the letters with my thumb or convince myself the carving had been there before. The headlights were enough. The words were there, pale and fresh under the number 12, and that changed the whole situation. I locked the doors again even though they were already locked. Then I put the SUV in park, kept the engine running, and turned on the hazard lights. The clicking filled the cabin in steady little bursts. It helped more than silence. It gave time a shape. My first thought was to call 911, not because I thought they would understand, but because if someone had moved a campsite post or carved something while I was driving the loop, then there might be a person nearby. A person was still the safest explanation, because people can be reported, people can be arrested, people leave fingerprints and tire tracks and stupid mistakes behind. The call failed. I tried the ranger number from the photo I had taken at the kiosk. Failed. I sent my sister a location pin and typed, "at campground." Something wrong with road. Leaving now. The message sat there with the little gray pending mark beside it. I tried again with only one word, help, pending. That was when walking out crossed my mind, only for a second. Then I pictured it honestly, leaving the SUV, taking the flashlight, walking a loop road that had already returned me to the same post twice. Fog on the ground, no signal, no clear entrance, no idea whether the signs still meant anything. If the road could not be trusted from inside a locked vehicle, it made no sense to trust it on foot. So I stayed in the car. I decided to keep moving, but slower. No sharp turns, no following signs. I would take the widest part of the road, keep the passenger side away from the trees, and aim for anything that looked like open space or utility light. If I saw the restroom building again, I would stop there only if it looked different from before. If I saw the kiosk, I would drive straight through the entrance without stopping. I shifted into drive. The road gave me 2 exit signs. Both appeared after the next bend, one on each side of the road. Same brown board, same white letters, same arrow shape. The left sign pointed left, the right sign pointed right. Both said exit. Both looked old. Both looked official. I stopped between them. The hazard lights clicked. The engine hummed. My own breath fogged the driver's window near the edge. I chose right because the map photo showed the entrance should be on that side of the loop. The road narrowed. A minute later, I passed Site 12 again. This time, there was a sheet of paper under my windshield wiper. It had not been there before. I did not get out. I turned the wipers on, thinking they would throw it off into the dark. The blade dragged across the glass once and stopped halfway with a rubber squeal. The paper did not move. It did not tear. It did not even bend under the blade. For a second, I thought it had frozen to the windshield. Then I realized the wiper was sliding over clean glass. The paper was inside, on the dashboard. I stared at it without touching it. It was a child's drawing done in crayon on white paper softened by moisture. A tent, a yellow lantern, a post with the number 12. 4 people inside the tent drawn as long black shapes with round heads. I knew I had not put it there. I had not had any paper in the car except receipts and maps. The windows had been closed, the doors locked. I had not left the vehicle since taking the first photo. At the bottom of the drawing in uneven block letters, someone had written, "Don't let it learn your shadow." I looked in the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. Sleeping bag, jacket, camera bag, nothing else. I looked down at the drawing again. The lantern in the picture was not hanging inside the tent. It was outside, pointed toward the road, and the 4 black figures were leaning the same direction, like plants bent toward light. The hazard lights clicked, once, twice. Then they stopped. The button was still pressed in. The dashboard went dark for half a second. When it came back, the navigation screen had switched itself on. I had not been using navigation. The screen showed a simple road line with no map data around it, just a gray path bending through black space. At the top, where a road name should have been, it said, Campground Loop 12. I put the SUV in reverse. The backup camera flickered on. For 1 frame, maybe less, it showed the rear seat instead of the road behind me. A low angle from inside the car, looking forward, like someone was sitting behind me with a camera pointed at the back of my head. Then the screen corrected itself. Gravel road, fog, trees. No one behind me. I did not reverse. I put both hands on the wheel and forced myself not to look at the mirror again. Whatever was happening was no longer only outside the car. That meant the car was not safe in the way I wanted it to be. But it was still warmer than the road, still lockable, still moving. That was the only advantage I had left. I drove forward. not toward the exit signs, not toward the map. Toward the sound I could barely hear under the engine. A low electrical hum. The restroom light, or the kiosk, or something pretending to be one of them. I followed the hum because it was the only thing that did not change when I looked at it. The exit signs changed. The road changed. The map on the screen had become useless. But the hum stayed low and steady under the engine like an old fluorescent light struggling in cold weather. I kept the headlights low and drove with both hands locked around the wheel. The road bent left, then right, then straightened into a section I did not remember. Trees stood close on both sides, close enough that the branches made short white flashes in the headlights. I kept waiting for the post marked 12 to appear again. Part of me thought if I saw it one more time, I would lose whatever was left of my ability to think. Instead, I saw the restroom building. It sat ahead on the right exactly where it had been earlier, with the same weak light over the door. The hum came from that fixture. I slowed, but did not stop. I had already made that rule. The building was useful only as a landmark, not a shelter, not a place to go inside. I stayed in the SUV and let it roll past at walking speed. As I passed the passenger window, reflected something yellow. A lantern. It hung from the old wooden hook at Site 12, though Site 12 was not beside the restroom building. In the reflection, I could see the post behind my car, the picnic table, and a tent that had not been there before. The tent was lit from inside by that weak yellow glow, and on the fabric were 4 shadows. 3 low, 1 standing. I turned my head toward the real campground outside the window. No tent, no lantern, no post. Just the restroom wall sliding past in the dark. I faced forward again. I did not look at the mirror. I did not check the back seat. I said out loud, "Keep driving." Not because I needed motivation, because I needed one instruction simple enough to obey. The road opened wider after the restroom. That should have meant the entrance was close. My headlights caught the map board ahead, then the self-pay kiosk. For 1 second I felt relief so strong it almost hurt. Then I saw the post beside the kiosk. 12. It was standing where the entrance sign should have been. Not at the far loop, not near the site, right beside the map board leaning toward the road like it had been waiting there the whole time. Under the white number were 2 carved lines. The first one made my hands go numb. Don't face the lantern toward the trees. The second line was below it, newer cut deeper. Don't let it face the road. I knew the first line. I did not know how. Not exactly. It felt less like remembering words and more like recognizing a warning from someone else's nightmare. A tent. A child's drawing. A lantern pointed the wrong way. 4 shadows where there should have been 3. The drawing on my dashboard shifted. Not physically. The paper did not move. But the crayon lantern on it seemed darker than before. The yellow wax pressed so hard into the paper that it had almost torn through. I kept one hand on the wheel and reached with the other to flip it over. I did not want that thing facing up. I did not want anything in the car showing a lantern pointed at the road. When I touched the paper, it was warm. Not car warm, not dashboard warm, hand warm. I let go. The engine sputtered once. That was when I understood the worst part. Not clearly, not in words I trusted, but enough. The warning was not about lanterns only. It was about direction, attention, light. A lantern facing the trees showed it what was inside the tent. Headlights facing the road showed it where the road led. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe I was building meaning out of fear. But fear had kept me alive so far. I turned off the headlights. The campground vanished. Only the dashboard remained dim and green. I switched to parking lights and kept the SUV moving barely faster than idle. The world outside became shapes instead of scenery. Road edge, gravel shoulder, dark trunks, the low rectangle of the kiosk. I did not look at the post. I did not look at the drawing. I did not look at the rearview mirror. I aimed for the space where the entrance road should have been and listened for the tires to change from loop gravel to the rougher entrance gravel. For a few seconds, I thought it was working. The road felt wider. The hum faded behind me. The screen on the dash flickered and went blank. Then something touched the rear window. Not a knock, a slide, as if a hand had been dragged slowly down the outside glass. I kept driving. The sound came again, but this time from the passenger side window. A soft, wet, streaking sound. Then from the windshield low near the wipers. I could not see anything making it. I refused to turn the headlights back on. The SUV rolled over a dip in the road. The self-pay kiosk appeared beside me again. Wrong side. Wrong angle. Too close. I clenched my teeth and kept moving. The postmark 12 was now in front of the car, close enough that the parking lights caught the lower half of it. I braked before I hit it. The woods stood in the middle of the road, not at a site, not beside the map board. In the road. For the first time I looked in the rearview mirror. I wish I had not. The back seat was empty when I turned my head. I know that because I checked it with my own eyes. Sleeping bag, jacket, camera bag, nothing else. But in the mirror, there was a shadow sitting behind me. Tall, bent slightly forward. Not a person with a face, not a body I could describe. Just a shape that used the empty space behind my seat wrong. It leaned toward the mirror like it was trying to understand what part of me belonged to the reflection. I looked away and put the SUV in reverse. The backup camera came on. This time it did not show the road. It showed the inside of my car from the back seat again. My shoulders, my hands on the wheel. The side of my face lit green by the dashboard. And behind my head in the camera view, the mirror showed something different from what I was doing. In the mirror, my shadow was not looking forward. It was looking back, straight into the camera. I slammed the camera screen off with my palm and drove forward around the post half on the shoulder, branches scraping along the passenger side. Something cracked under the tires. Wood, maybe, or old plastic. I did not stop. The post disappeared behind me. The road widened. The trees pulled back. Ahead through the low fog, I saw the entrance gate. Open. Beside it, the map board stood under the weak kiosk light. As I passed, I saw the campground map clearly for 1 second. Sites 1 through 11 were printed in faded black. Someone had drawn Site 12 in pencil, not at the end of the loop, not where I had slept, right over the entrance road, where my SUV was passing through. I did not slow down until the highway lines appeared under my headlights. White paint, real asphalt, reflectors along the shoulder, the kind of ordinary road details I had never been grateful for before. I drove another mile before I let myself breathe like a normal person. My phone found service all at once. The pending message to my sister sent first, then the location pin. Then a missed call notification from her appeared, even though the call had never come through inside the campground. I pulled into the first wide shoulder I found and kept the engine running while I called her back. I did not tell her everything. I said I had gotten turned around in a campground and thought someone might have tampered with the signs. I said I was safe now. She wanted me to drive to a hotel. I told her I would. Then I called the ranger number from the kiosk photo and left a message that sounded as calm as I could make it. Wrong signage, possible vandalism, a self-pay envelope with my name already written on it, a site marker that did not match the posted map. I did not mention the shadow in the mirror. I did not mention the drawing on the dashboard. When I looked for it, the drawing was gone. The dashboard was empty except for my receipt stub and the charging cable. I checked the passenger floor, between the seats, under the sleeping bag. Nothing. That should have made me feel better. Instead, it felt like losing evidence before I could decide whether I wanted any. I spent the rest of the night in a hotel with all the lights on. The ranger called me the next afternoon. He was polite in the guarded way people are when they think someone may be confused but do not want to say it. He told me the campground was open, but there was no active Site 12. The current loop ended at 11. He said there had been an old 12th site years ago, closed after storm damage and removed from the map. I asked about the post. He went quiet for a second. Then he said there was an old post marked 12 in a storage shed near the kiosk. It had been pulled out of the ground long before that season. He said it was weathered, scratched up, and probably waiting to be hauled away with other damaged signs. He did not find it in the road. He did not find it beside the kiosk. He did not find a lantern and envelope with my name or any pencil marks added to the map. He did find one thing. The self-pay slot was empty. No envelopes inside, no cash, nothing. I told him I had paid. I told him I had dropped the envelope into the slot myself. He said he believed me. That was worse than if he had not. A week later, I checked the dash cam. I had avoided it until then because part of me already knew it would not help. The first clips were normal. Highway, turn off, kiosk, my headlights on the map board, the road into the loop. Then the files jumped. There was no continuous recording of me circling the campground, no exit signs, no post in the road, only one extra file, no timestamp, no GPS coordinates. It was 12 seconds long. The camera angle was wrong. It was not windshield view. It came from the back seat, low and slightly tilted, looking over my right shoulder while I drove. My hands were on the wheel. My face was in the rearview mirror. I looked terrified, but that was not the part that made me close the laptop the first time. In the mirror, my reflection was looking forward. The shadow behind me was looking at the camera. It did not have eyes, not exactly, but the shape of its head was turned the way a person turns when they know they are being filmed. I deleted the file. Then I emptied the trash. Then I removed the memory card from the dash cam and snapped it in half over the kitchen sink. I still drive through forest roads sometimes. You cannot avoid them where I live. But I do not use campground apps anymore, and I do not stop at late season sites after dark. If a motel is full, I keep driving until I find another one. If I get tired, I sleep in a gas station lot under lights. There is one thing I have never told my sister. A month after it happened, my navigation system updated by itself. New maps, new roads, normal software stuff. I was driving home from work at night when the screen flickered and showed a side road that did not exist cutting through a dark patch of state forest. The label stayed for maybe 3 seconds. Campground Loop 12. Then it vanished. My headlights lifted on their own, just a little, like the automatic high beams had seen something ahead and wanted a better look into the trees. There was no road there, no sign, no campground, only the forest. And for those 3 seconds before the map corrected itself, the route line bent toward the dark like it already knew the way in. Some things in the woods do not follow you. They wait for you to notice the wrong sound, the wrong shadow, the wrong campsite marker. And once you notice them leaving, does not always mean you left alone. Different road, same darkness,